I'll wait on you if you. The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare the committee in recess at any point. Before we begin today's hearing, I would like to take a moment to recognize the loss of our dear friend to all on this committee, Congressman Donald Payne, Jr. Congressman Payne was a fierce advocate for the people of New Jersey's 10th District. His legacy, along with his father's legacy, will serve as a reminder to us all of what it means to be a true public servant. I really appreciated the time that I got to work with Congressman Payne on the colorectal cancer caucus. He was a fierce fighter against that disease. I now recognize for a moment the Ranking Member Thompson, to honor the life and legacy of Representative Payne.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. This morning, we remember the life of Congressman Donald M. Payne, Jr., our colleague and friend. He was a union worker, a toll collector. He literally kept the buses of Essex County, New Jersey, running on time. He was an Essex County freeholder, a Newark City Council member, a city council president. He was a congressman, a statesman, a son, father, brother, and a husband. With a kind heart, a closet full of bow ties, and a wit as sharp as his suits, Congressman Payne brought people together. But he also fought for what he believed in. He gave a voice to the voiceless. He never wavered. He never backed down. While we mourn the loss of our colleague and friend, we know his legacy lives on. Congressman Payne's legacy lives on the work he did in Congress, including right here in this committee, to make every child and every school in America safe. Because of Congressman Payne's advocacy, the Department of Homeland Security today reports to Congress on school security. Because of a law he authored, amply named the Homeland Security for Children Act, the Department of Homeland Security must plan for children's unique needs during disasters. His legacy lives on in the hearts of his wife, Bee, and it lives on in the bright futures of his children, the triplets, Donald, Jack, and Yvonne. We pray for their peace and comfort at this difficult time. Congressman Payne served in Washington, D.C., but his heart never left Newark's South Ward. Every moment he spent in the halls of Congress was in service to the people of Newark. Congressman Don Payne Jr. leaves a legacy to be proud of. May he rest in power and rest in peace. I yield back.
I ask that the members of this committee join me in observing a moment of silence to honor Congressman Payne's memory. Thank you. The purpose of our hearing today is to receive testimony from state and local law enforcement officers and the hurdles that their law enforcement agencies face in keeping our communities safe. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. We're here today to honor and recognize law enforcement officers nationwide during National Police Week. While our nation has always been grateful to our men and women in law enforcement, beginning in 1962, we officially began recognizing their bravery, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to public safety on the 15th of May. Supporting our men and women in law enforcement should not be reserved for 1 week out of the year. Our nation should be grateful every day to this unique group of men and women who risk their lives for our freedom and who serve our communities with a distinct sense of duty and honor. There's a saying that service is the rent we pay for living on earth. Our men and women who protect us daily pay the ultimate service and, for far too many, the ultimate sacrifice. Last year, 136 law enforcement officers were tragically killed in the line of duty. This year, there's been 56 and countless others injured. Just a few weeks ago, April 16th, police officer Michael Jensen of the Syracuse Police Department and Lieutenant Husak of the Onondaga County Sheriff's Office in New York were both shot and killed while attempting to locate a subject who had led officers on a vehicle pursuit. Officer Jensen had served with the Syracuse Police Department 2.5 years, and he is survived by his parents and sister. Lieutenant Husak served with the County Sheriff's Office for 16 years. He is survived by his wife and 3 children. I know for them and their colleagues, this loss is incomprehensible. In early May, 4 law enforcement officers were killed in Charlotte, North Carolina, while attempting to serve a warrant to a convicted felon, and 4 more were injured. A former Durham-based Marshals Service Task Force officer stated that he cannot remember another time in his 35-year career when 8 officers were attacked in one incident. From violent attacks on law enforcement to significant increase in crime across the country, it is an understatement to say that Americans no longer feel safe in their communities. We must provide reassurance to law-abiding citizens by holding lawbreakers accountable and let the level of accountability serve as a deterrence to others. Tough prosecutions, proper sentencing are not only examples of holding criminals accountable for their actions, but they send a message that federal, state, and local jurisdictions will do what is necessary to protect their citizens. Even more important, this action will communicate to our law enforcement officers our appreciation and our commitment to equipping them with the resources required to fulfill their duties. Increasing crime rates and obstacles to prosecuting criminals are challenging enough, but dealing with these difficulties without adequate manpower and funding adds to the burden that law enforcement agencies across the nation are confronting. Law enforcement agencies are not only grappling with unprecedented challenges in recruiting new personnel, but are also contending with attrition rates and budget reductions. These factors hinder law enforcement agencies' ability to fulfill their obligation to safeguard Americans and obstruct police departments nationwide from assessing the necessary resources to enhance their officer training. In so doing, these factors also increase the risk to the men and women in blue who risk all for us every day. By reducing law enforcement budgets, police departments will face the tough decision of either lowering standards or being unable to fulfill their hiring requirements. This committee plays a critical role in overseeing the Department of Homeland Security, which aims to assist state, local, and tribal and territorial law enforcement agencies in ensuring the safety, security, and resilience of our communities. We continue to focus on ensuring that information is efficiently shared between the federal government and state and local law enforcement agencies to combat the wide variety of threats from criminals and terrorists. Different parts of our country have their own unique challenges when it comes to dealing with crime. It's important that we ensure that DHS is properly supporting both metropolitan and rural communities as they confront these challenges. Today, I hope we can examine the ways that DHS supports these law enforcement agencies and identify new ways to improve. We should all work to ensure that the resources provided by DHS are effective in assisting law enforcement as they work to carry out their important mission. Lastly, it's crucial that as a nation, we regain a sense of appreciation and respect for the men and women in law enforcement who serve our communities and who pay the ultimate sacrifice for our protections. We have a distinguished panel of witnesses to testify about the daily challenges, successes, and strategies their officers encounter in dealing with various issues within their departments and communities. Thank you again to our witnesses for being here this morning, and I look forward to this important discussion. Before I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement, I would like to welcome Mr. Kennedy from New York to Congress and to our committee. I look forward to working with you, and I will say that your addition here takes us to 7 members from New York. I think you're now 21% of this committee, so not sure what that means, but we're glad to have you. It actually is, reflects back to the start of this committee and really what started it all. So we're very glad to have you. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our panel of witnesses for being here today and for their service to our country. In honor of National Police Week, I also want to recognize the incredible contributions of law enforcement and honor those brave officers who made the ultimate sacrifice to keep our communities safe. Our nation is forever in their debt. Today, the committee is meeting to examine how Congress can support state and local law enforcement. This is an important question. National Police Week is of great importance, but congressional support for law enforcement is about more than attending a ceremony or wearing a blue ribbon on your lapel 1 week out of the year. It's about supporting law enforcement, not just where ceremonial words or symbolic gestures, but showing up when it counts and voting for the resources our police officers need every day. It's about saying no when a disgraced former president calls for defunding the FBI or certain members threaten to cut off funding for DHS because they have political disagreements with the Biden administration. It's about keeping dangerous weapons out of the hands of those who would seek to harm our communities, our kids, our houses of worship, our supermarkets, our gathering places, and the police sworn to protect all of us. And it's about honoring the heroic law enforcement officers, Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, and others who protected and defended this very Capitol and everyone in it on January 6, 2021. While extreme MAGA Republicans try to cut funding and undermine public trust in law enforcement, Democrats are committed to providing federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement with funding and support to keep our communities safe. Democrats have made historic investments in public safety, law enforcement, school security, gun violence prevention, and nonprofit security for churches, synagogues, and schools. As a result, violent crime has dropped across nearly every category during the Biden administration. We're proud of doing right by law enforcement, but recognize more remains to be done. I hope to hear from our witnesses today about supporting community policing efforts across the country and how Congress can help fund these critical efforts. I also hope to hear from our witnesses about how we can encourage police forces to recruit more diverse candidates, including people of color and women, because police forces work best when they reflect the communities they serve. Again, I thank the witnesses for joining us today and express my appreciation for all the men and women of law enforcement who serve communities across America with honor and integrity. Be assured that those words have been and will continue to be backed up by action. Before I close, Mr. Chairman, I want to take a moment to welcome, as you did, a new member of our committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Kennedy. While we have quite a few New Yorkers serving on this panel, as already been said, Mr. Kennedy is the only one that represents a district in Western New York. His district is located on the U.S.-Canada border and has multiple international crossings, including the Peace Bridge. I know he will be actively engaged on northern borders issues, and we welcome it. Mr. Kennedy also recently chaired the New York State Senate's Transportation Committee, which will be invaluable to his service on this committee's Transportation and Maritime Subcommittee. We welcome him, and we wish you well. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have an important panel of witnesses before us today, and I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. I'd like to now formally introduce our witnesses. The Honorable Gregory Mays serves as the Deputy Commissioner of Homeland Security for the Tennessee Department of Safety and Homeland Security. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Hayes had a distinguished career with the United States Secret Service, serving in a variety of roles that spanned a 25-year career. He holds a bachelor's degree from Auburn University, where he received his commission as an officer in the United States Navy through the Navy ROTC program. Following Naval Flight Officer training, Mr. Mays was assigned to Patrol Squadron 5, where he was designated a patrol plane mission commander and completed multiple deployments, including numerous missions in support of Operation Desert Storm. Sheriff Mike Chapman was first elected Sheriff of Loudoun County, Virginia in 2011 and was re-elected to his fourth term in 2023. He directs the largest full-service sheriff's office in the Commonwealth of Virginia and employs approximately 700 sworn deputies and 200 civilian personnel, and serves a population of approximately 447,000 residents and an area of 519 square miles. Sheriff Chapman has been a leader in advancing proactive and successful law enforcement and community engagement programs. During his tenure, major crime decreased 37%, the greatest reduction of any jurisdiction in the Washington metropolitan area. He has also successfully led efforts in addressing the heroin and most recently fentanyl problems that have impacted Loudoun County. Mr. Michael Bullock currently serves as the president of the Austin Police Association. During his time as president, he has worked to address the recruiting and retention problems that have affected the Austin Police Department. President Bullock is a 6-year veteran of the Austin Police Department. Mr. Rodney Bryant serves as the president of the National Black Law Enforcement Executives. Prior to his work with the National Black Law Enforcement Executives, Mr. Bryant served 34 years in the Atlanta Police Department. During his career, he climbed the ranks, serving as a patrol officer, senior police, sergeant, lieutenant, assistant commander, and major. Highlights of his career include leading the command of the College Football Playoff Championship in 2018 and Super Bowl 53 in 2019. He retired in 2022 as the 25th chief of the department. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Deputy Commissioner Mays for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Green and Ranking Member Thompson, for holding this hearing and for the invitation to testify with my fellow law enforcement leaders on some of the critical law enforcement and security issues facing the American homeland. The Tennessee Office of Homeland Security is a law enforcement agency with statewide jurisdiction. Our primary mission is to investigate threats to life, threats to our schools, to protect our state's critical infrastructure and major events, and to work with our federal, state, and local partners to prepare for and mitigate any threat to our state. Our department's overall mission is to serve, secure, and protect the people of Tennessee. We set about every day to accomplish that mission. As we gather here today during National Police Week to honor the fallen police officers across our nation, it's also a time for us to discuss or to focus on the challenges faced by local law enforcement and the threats to our homeland. My testimony will focus on three areas to highlight some successes and challenges, and I thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I would like to start with security in our schools. On March 27th, 2023, Nashville was rocked by a shooting at the Covenant School. 3 children and 3 adults lost their lives, in addition to the shooter, who was killed by police while she was still shooting at arriving officers from a second-story window of the school. This shooting, so close to home, further steeled our resolve to do everything we can to prevent something similar from happening again. We approach school security in Tennessee by focusing on 3 main areas: physical security, door locks, etc. Sometimes the simple solutions are the best. Secondly, we must have proper response and training so that our officers respond properly, just as the Metro Nashville Police Department did at the Covenant shooting. And third, perhaps the most complex, we must investigate every credible threat and evaluate the subject's capability and intent to act violently. Research, such as the U.S. Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center study, published in 2021, titled Averting Targeted School Violence, looked at 67 different averted school attacks. 94% of the school shooters told somebody they were going to do it. The other 6% in that study were behaving so oddly that someone else reported them. So we can take away from that in all cases, we, the collective community, need to have our ears turned and be listening and then respond when threats come to our schools. We encourage this type of reporting, and the Tennessee Office of Homeland Security operates a 24/7 threat desk. Since the start of this school year, we have received approximately 322 threats to Tennessee schools. That amounts to a little over 1 threat to a Tennessee school every day. In the interest of time here, I'd like to pivot now to the subject of grants. Tennessee has benefited greatly from our federal Homeland Security grant program. Funding for these state and territorial preparedness grants has dropped 44% since FY 2010, with a 10% cut alone in FY 24. We rely on these programs, state and local law enforcement do, and these grant programs save lives. As an example, on July 31st, 2023, a suspect attempted to gain entry to the Margolin Hebrew Academy in Memphis with the apparent intent to kill those inside this Jewish school. After unsuccessful attempts to gain entry through locked doors, the subject fired shots outside the school and fled. He was encountered by police a short distance away, was taken into custody after brandishing a weapon. The school credited the recent security upgrades as saving lives, and they wrote a letter to my office, and I want to read just a couple of sentences from it. Quote, "The implementation of the latest security grant," and he's talking about the nonprofit security grant from DHS, "the implementation of the latest security grant allowed us to reinforce our entrances with new doors and access control, ultimately preventing the shooter from gaining entry. Additionally, the cameras installed from the previous grant played a pivotal role in assisting law enforcement in locating and neutralizing the shooter swiftly." Again, these grant funds save lives, and as federal funding for these programs decline, the needs are increasing. In Tennessee, we do not rely just on federal funding for the nonprofit grants. We have a state-funded program, and as an illustration of how much of a need there is, last year we received $2.2 million in requests, and we far outstripping the $750,000 in state funds that I had to award. And in the interest of time, sir, I'll conclude my testimony there. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Sheriff Chapman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm the elected Sheriff of Loudoun County, Virginia. I appreciate being invited to testify at this important hearing during this one of the most important weeks of the year for law enforcement. Loudoun County sits about 30 miles southwest of Washington, D.C., and is home to about 450,000 residents. I am in my 46th year of law enforcement, having served as a police officer and detective in Maryland, 23 years as a Drug Enforcement Administration as a special agent from coast to coast, and in 3 foreign assignments, and over 12 years as an elected sheriff of Virginia's largest full-service sheriff's office, employing close to 900. Prior to being elected sheriff, I served 3 years as a law enforcement subject matter expert with Booz Allen. I bring firsthand knowledge of police work, federal experience, and private sector perspective, and the complexities associated with the elected office of sheriff. I'm here today on behalf of the National Sheriff's Association and serve as its chair for Homeland Security and on its board of directors. I'd like to address today's hearing, standing strong with the thin blue line, how Congress can support state and local law enforcement. Historically and currently, law enforcement collaborates well together, regardless if it is the sheriff's office or police department. When national law enforcement organizations collectively present their concerns and positions, whether in support or opposition to legislation, Congress needs to listen. Congress's decision can significantly impede law enforcement service performance, investigations, or even recruiting. Supplying grant money or funding is not the cure-all. Backing from Congress in all aspects is essential. This is National Police Week as America honors the day-to-day service and sacrifice of our law enforcement community. And on this day, Peace Officer Memorial Day, we honor those who have given their lives in the line of duty. This year, we have already witnessed 58 line of duty deaths among law enforcement officers, with 23 of those by gunfire. Our job is dangerous, and we need to help and serve and protect our communities and ourselves. We ask that you recognize how law enforcement has and continues to raise the bar. The progress that I have witnessed since I was hired to be a police officer back in 1978 when it comes to training, professionalism, innovation, and best practices is nothing short of amazing. It is important that you recognize the progress and publicly show your support for our profession. It is also important that you listen so that you can help us do our jobs better. Let's start with intelligence gathering and police response. Currently, there are 80 state or locally run fusion centers in 50 states and U.S. territories. They receive federal grant funding, which accounts for about 1/3 of the cost of operation. There is also federal, state, and local coordination through 6 strategically placed regional information systems, RIS, centers across the U.S. Considering that local law enforcement are the boots on the ground, it is critical that federal information flows quickly in our direction, even if the information is incomplete. The responsibility for this communication and coordination primarily falls under the Department of Homeland Security, Intelligence and Analysis, INA, and is the only federal entity that is statutorily required to coordinate Homeland Security threat information sharing with state and local law enforcement governments throughout fusion centers. Congress should ensure that INA is equipped and empowered to carry out that mission effectively. In Loudoun County, I experienced a personal case study with DHS regarding poor communication, both laterally and with other federal agencies, and onward to state and local agencies. In February of 2022, I was made aware of some 1,000 evacuees from Afghanistan that would be arriving in Loudoun County in 2 weeks as part of Operation Allies Welcome, following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. This would be the first wave during a 6-month period, all to be located at the National Conference Center dorm-style living facility in the suburban residential area of our county next to a middle and a high school. I immediately reached out to the DHS's Chief of Staff for additional information and to question their lack of notification earlier to local enforcement and our public safety partners. We needed to know how well the evacuees were vetted, if the local hospital had been contacted, if school personnel and community members living within walking distance in that community were notified, if any houses of worship had been contacted, if language capability services had been retained, and how security would be conducted. Unfortunately, none of these concerns had been addressed. DHS subsequently postponed the resettlement for 2 weeks, still not addressing these issues. I alerted the public and organized a community stakeholders meeting, including dozens of agencies, which led to specific assignments in a community forum that, for the most part, alleviated the apprehension of this to the community. Our local initiative made a huge difference. For the next 6 months, potential chaos was averted, and there were no major public safety incidents. This extraordinary effort, however, would not have been necessary had DHS communicated an organized plan. We hope that this will improve in the future. Today, we face a new set of challenges on many of our college campuses, and cities over matters regarding the Middle East. It is critical that we receive timely information from DHS to get ahead of the curve. We need your help. We need your backing. We need improved communication from DHS to our local officers and deputies. Thank you again for holding this hearing and for listening.
Thank you, Sheriff Chapman, and I now recognize Mr. Bullock for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Green, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Michael Bullock, and I'm the president of the Austin Police Association in Texas, as well as a senior police officer with the Austin Police Department. I wish it were amidst better times that I sat here before you today, but the somber week of honoring our fellow law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty sets the tone for the state of our profession. In my view, the state of law enforcement is dire. We all recognize that criminal justice as a whole is a complex policy issue for which no singular solution exists. But if we continue to do nothing, the sense of lawlessness being perpetuated in urban city centers and across the country will only get worse. Austin is the 10th largest city in the United States with 1 million people living in the capital of Texas. Despite this, we don't even make the top 25 list when it comes to staffing. We are 700 officers short of where studies done by the city of Austin have shown we need to be. Our staffing issues can be linked to a few key events, though our struggles are shared by agencies all across the country. In 2017, the Austin City Council unanimously voted against a contract with the Austin Police Association, which governs the wages, benefits, and working conditions of the men and women of the Austin Police Department. As a result, beginning in 2018, we have had more officers leave our department each year than have joined. Compounding this problem in 2020 was when our city leaders defunded our department by $150 million, cut 150 authorized positions, and canceled cadet classes, all for the sake of political posturing. Our staffing has been in a freefall that's led us to a vacancy rate of over 30%. Little surprise then that after these decisions and an exodus from the department began, that a year later, our number of homicides nearly doubled. The last 3 years have been the highest homicide numbers in Austin's history. Though we are not a border city, the impact of immigration policies is felt by us as well. Our city has asked for help from the Texas State Troopers who came for a time and had a notable impact on crime by increasing patrol presence. But due to the ongoing border crisis, they were called away to help secure the Texas border and no longer able to help us in Austin. As a result, in May of 2023, teenagers shot and killed a man in Southeast Austin when attempting to rob him. The reason they gave for this heinous crime was they knew state troopers had left Austin and they decided to start committing crime again. Adding additional layers of complexity to this issue is a lackadaisical attitude towards holding criminals accountable by judges and prosecutors, while at the same time seeing those same prosecutors target officers, which in turn has encouraged criminals to be increasingly violent towards law enforcement. Over these same time periods, we've seen a myriad of critical incidents take place. Austin has dealt with a serial bomber planting improvised explosive devices all across our city, killing our residents. We've had numerous mass shootings, including one breaking out during one of our largest festivals that draws people from all across the country to visit our city. And most notably on our minds is an incident that took the life of one of our own. On November 11th, 2023, in the early morning hours, our APT SWAT team was called to a residence in Southeast Austin where an armed subject was barricaded inside the residence, had already stabbed one of his family members with 2 more held hostage inside. And he had shot at officers when they had initially responded. Fearing for the lives of others inside the residence and knowing this vile suspect had already attempted to kill one of his own family members and willingly shot at our fellow law enforcement officers, our SWAT team went through the door to try and save lives. After going in, they were met by a hellacious barrage of gunfire from the suspect, who was well armed and wearing body armor. While the suspect was ultimately killed, it came at a high price. 2 of our officers were shot, one of which was Officer George Pastor, who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Across this country, we now see a law enforcement officer shot in the line of duty every 21 hours. This year alone, we've had over 145 officers shot, which has been increasing year over year. Our job is to uphold the Constitution and enforce the laws passed by yourselves, as well as your state and local counterparts. This is a charge that we take seriously and one we are willing to sacrifice our lives for. I sit here before you today, though, pleading for your help. We need help in addressing our staffing needs support in enforcing our laws, providing better training resources, and transcending the political rhetoric to end the war on law enforcement and restore law and order in our country. The trends we see in Austin are not isolated, and if not reversed, I fear that lawlessness is all but inevitable. Again, thank y'all for your time and for taking up this important matter, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant, for your testimony. Mr. Bullock, for your testimony. And I now recognize Mr. Bryant for his 5 minutes, summarize his opening statement.
Mark Green, Ranking Member Congressman Benny Thompson, and committee members. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Executive Board, members, and constituents of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. My name is Rodney Bryant, and I am the National President. NOBLE serves as the conscience of law enforcement by being committed to justice by action. NOBLE has 58 chapters and represent over 4,500 members worldwide that consist of chief executive officers, command-level law enforcement officials, and federal, state, local, county law enforcement agencies, and criminal justice practitioners. I have served more than 35 years in law enforcement profession in various positions of increasing responsibilities to include serving as a patrol officer and ascending all ranks to become the 25th Chief of Police of the City of Atlanta. It is an honor for NOBLE to provide written testimony on the topic of standing strong on the thin blue line, how Congress can support local law enforcement. I would be remiss if I did not recognize that this week is National Police Week, where we honor and remember those law enforcement officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. In 2023, approximately 136 officers died in the line of duty, representing a 40% reduction compared to 2022. However, one officer is one too many. NOBLE will continue to stand vigilant and in solidarity with law enforcement in an effort to reduce the statistics. We invite Congress to join us in this noble pursuit. On April 29th, our nation experienced the deadliest attack against U.S. law enforcement officers since 2016. An AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and a .40 caliber handgun were deployed in Charlotte, North Carolina, shooting that result in 4 law enforcement officers being killed and wounding 4 others. I extend heartfelt prayers and condolences to the officers, families, agencies, and affected communities. NOBLE is very concerned about the level of gun violence in the United States, and specifically the correlation between violence and the proliferation of assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. It is our organization's opinion that violence, particularly gun violence, is a public health issue. And with all public health issues, it demands a comprehensive, non-judgmental, pragmatic, evidence-based approach to saving lives and reducing injuries. A positive step toward addressing the level of gun violence in our nation has taken with the passage of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. NOBLE supported this legislation. The bill combined gun safety legislation with mental health and school security resources. We at NOBLE recommend that in addition to the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, that Congress, the law enforcement profession, and communities across this nation work to secure the passage of bipartisan legislation that at minimum will address the following: mandate universal background checks, assault weapons, ban high-capacity magazines, and mandate safe gun storage. It is NOBLE's belief, and many in our profession, that the continued relaxation of gun laws poses a real danger to the law enforcement officers and the community. It is my opinion that the law enforcement profession is in need of comprehensive federal legislation such as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Noble did support the Biden administration executive orders on advancing effective, accountable policing and criminal justice practice to enhance public trust and public safety. There are key elements in the order that we feel are responsible and actionable, such as accountability, workforce support, use of force, and resources support for mental health and behavioral health services. Our organization recommends to Congress a bipartisan effort to find common ground on a very basic constitutional right within the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. For many parts of our societies, citizens have not felt equally protected by key American Constitution law enforcement. In many communities of color, the first names of unarmed citizens that were killed by officers who took an oath to protect and serve resonate today and for generations to come. Lastly, I appeal to our congressional leaders on both parties to continue to support our federal law enforcement agencies in the areas of funding, public support, and policies that ensure that they maintain their readiness. It is critical that federal law enforcement resources are available to support state, local, county, tribal law enforcement agencies. There must be a unified congressional understanding of the importance of ensuring homeland security for our nation, which equates to strengthening all levels of public safety. On behalf of the National Organization of Law Enforcement Executives, I thank you for supporting our profession and our ability to maintain public safety. Our members stand ready to meet the needs of our communities and nation. Thank you again for this opportunity to provide testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. First, I'd like to start with Mr. Mays. You mentioned, I think, 3 sort of avenues of approach, or so to speak, use a military term, through which you guys are working on school safety, and you talked specifically about response and training. Can you describe some of the training that you're talking about and the net effect, and where DHS and the federal government are assisting in that area?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. We learned, as a nation, we learned after the Uvalde, Texas school shooting what a bad response looked like, and we know from these shootings that the law enforcement needs to respond and go into the school immediately and stop the killing. Right? We saw in Nashville at the Covenant School shooting, the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department officers went in immediately, and it was interesting for me to find out that most of those officers did not know each other and had never trained together, but yet their training in the police department under Chief Drake's leadership was so good that if you watch the body camera video, it looks like they train together every day. So training works, and the procedures that need to be in place are now pretty universal through a system called ALERT. It's a active shooter response type training. School resource officers are trained in this. Police officers are trained. Homeland Security agents in Tennessee are trained in this response. We believe that that's a key part of school security, but much more important, I think, or just as important as the response, is not waiting until the danger is at the doorstep. We, as I stated in my written testimony about the averted school attack study, we hear a lot of information about a planned school attack. We must go out and confront that threat and determine whether there is capability and intent before it ends up on the doorstep of the school.
FLETC recently came to the state and did a little bit of training. Was that helpful? Do you know about their trip to Tennessee and what they did?
I do not, Mr. Chairman. I'm not familiar with that particular trip.
I think they may have worked with THP on that. Thank you. Mr. Bullock, you described the impact of budgets, and budget cuts, and the mass shortage of officers. What's the impact on the other officers, on the force, stress-wise, marriages, things like that, for these huge shortages of personnel?
It takes a tremendous mental toll on officers. Just as an example, because of the severe shortages that we are experiencing, officers who are assigned as a detective that should be investigating major crimes like homicides, robberies, things of that nature, are having to work patrol shifts. So they're being sent back to patrol and are diverted away from their assigned duties as an investigator in order to take 911 calls. And so they're having to do that on a regular rotation basis each quarter. So that does have a significant impact, as you mentioned, on mental health. It has an impact on family life. It adds another layer of unpredictability to an already unpredictable job. So we do see an increase in officers who may have issues at home that may deal with, alcohol use, a variety of other things that come as a result of increased stress.
What about the rhetoric, sort of that there's been, it's died down a little bit, but, over maybe a year or two ago, this whole defund the police thing, how has that impacted morale of the force down at the, as we'd say in the Army soldier level, but at the officer level?
Yes, as you put, kind of for the boots on the ground, it has a pretty devastating impact as well, because you feel like you are not valued for what you're being asked. You're asked to be willing to give of your life in the defense of others, and those who are responsible for providing resources to do the job you're being asked to do are seemingly pushing you to an invaluable role. So from that aspect, it does have an impact as well. And I will say, even though we have seen to a degree some of those funds restored, we do see some shell games that get played with that nonetheless, where the funding may seemingly be restored, but yet it's a responsibility that wasn't necessarily given back to the department. And so we're given the funds back, but it's not actually going to areas where we need it to go in order to recruit, retain, and provide the resources for officers to do their job.
Thank you. I now yield, and I recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. One of the questions, comments that ran through everyone's opening statement was the threat of violence that occurs in this country. And most of those threats have occurred with the use of firearms. Some of us advocate universal background checks for people who own guns. I'm a hunter. I try to get in the woods every chance I get, and every now and then I get lucky and bring something home. But I don't have a problem with whatever the requirements are to own that gun. So, I'm a law-abiding gun owner. So I'd like to ask each witness their position on universal background checks to be able to purchase a gun. Mr. Mays?
Thank you, Ranking Member Thompson, for the question. Whether it's background checks or extreme risk protection orders, whatever may be necessary, we would like to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. I've spent my career, both in state law enforcement and as a Secret Service agent, encountering people who are suffering from mental illness, people who are homicidal, people who are delusional, and they have guns. And we have very little tools available to take the weapon away. I'm not too worried about law-abiding citizens like yourself who go hunting.
Sure.
It's people who are of limited capacity or have bad intentions, and this is where the mental health piece and the law enforcement piece need to work better together. I've encountered people over my career who are admitting to me that they're mentally ill and depressed, and he's holding a pistol in his hand, and I have to call his dad to come up and try to talk the guy out of the pistol to give it to his dad because I have no way to take it away from him. These are the kind of challenges I have.
I understand, and let me just say that what we did for the federal people in DHS, we passed a specific piece of legislation to help with the mental health of those people, because we talked to the family members and other people who were distressed. Sheriff, can you address that?
I have a large agreement with my colleague here. I think the biggest problem isn't so much, it's the people that are criminals that get the guns, and they don't necessarily get them, purchase them properly and the way they should, and with the background checks. We do have background checks, obviously, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I'd have to know the details, quite frankly, of exactly what you mean by universal background check. I think a lot of that's already done within the Commonwealth of Virginia, but my biggest concern is the fact that a lot of these weapons are stolen. They're stolen or used in crimes, and so you can do whatever you want. The fact of the matter is, I think we've got to hold these people accountable that use guns in crimes and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law, rather than constantly trying to change laws that are really only going to impact the honest citizen buying a gun. So,
Well, Sheriff, we won't debate it, but an honest citizen can get a gun.
Right.
And I'm just saying that if there's a dishonest citizen, and it may be 5%, 2%, that's one of those steps we can do to mitigate that. Mr. Bullock?
I'd like to hit on what Sheriff just said, which is a large part of what we deal with is stolen firearms. I certainly understand the question about universal background checks. Coming from Texas, we definitely like our guns as well. I think that efforts are probably best spent in holding people accountable that are breaking the law very actively, including people that are knowingly using stolen firearms.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bryant?
Likewise, many of my colleagues, I think that universal background checks will assist us in the issues that we're seeing. In many instances, with the level of proliferation of guns that we're seeing on our streets, any aspect that can allow us to minimize what we're seeing will be beneficial, not just to the citizens, but to the law enforcement officers as well.
Thank you very much. One more question. On January 6th, thousands of angry supporters who whipped into a frenzy by the former president marched on the White House to the Capitol, where they broke a police barricade, smashed windows, and assaulted police officers in an attempt to obstruct the democratic process. Over 140 officers protecting the Capitol were injured that day. 5 police officers died in the days and weeks followed. Mr. Mays, do you agree that this violence against police officers was unjustified?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sheriff?
any violence against police officers doing their job should not be allowed in any sense of the word. So I agree that anybody that does that should be fully prosecuted.
Mr. Bullock?
Take the same stance. Anyone that commits violence towards law enforcement should not be tolerated.
Mr. Bryant?
I agree that any violence against police officers lawfully doing their job should not be tolerated.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi and the vice chair of the committee, Mr. Guest, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To our witnesses, thank you for being with us this morning. Chief Bryant, before we begin, I was wondering if you could give the committee an update, if you have any, on the 3 officers in Atlanta who were shot over the weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inquiring. All 3 are in recovery. I spoke to the chief immediately after that incident occurred. He has continued to update me as a courtesy to inform me that they are improving. Thank you so much for asking.
And if you will please send along to those officers and the members of that department that our thoughts and prayers are with them during their period of recovery, and they will particularly be remembered this week. As we look at the headlines, I pulled some very brief headlines in preparation for today's hearing. I put in the search engine, officer involved shooting. One came up 3 a.m. this morning. New Mexico State Police and Roswell Police Department investigating an officer-involved shooting that left a Roswell police officer injured. Headline from May the 12th. Police identify a man shot dead by law enforcement after opening fire in Amazon warehouse. The article says West Jefferson police have identified a man killed by police Sunday. The gunman was fatally shot by law enforcement after he shot a Columbus police officer. Also a headline from May the 12th. Euclid police officer dead after ambush shooting. The first paragraph said a first-year Euclid police officer in his 20s was shot dead Saturday night in what authorities described as an ambush after officers responded to a disturbance on East 211th Street. We referenced and just spoke of the 3 Atlanta police officers who were shot and injured this weekend as they respond to a call involving an armed gunman. And I think it was mentioned in at least one, if not several, of the opening statement by the officers of the shooting that happened in late April in Charlotte, where we had 4 officers killed and 4 other officers who were wounded in that particular incident. And so my question, and I'll start with you, Mr. Mays, are law enforcement officers, are they safer today than they were 3 years ago?
Thank you for the question. That's a tough one to answer. I have a sense that it's worse out there on the streets. That's I don't wear a uniform every day, so I get that information from talking to my fellow officers.
And I'm not asking you to explain why you feel yes or no, but just, and again, I'm just asking for your opinion because you're deputy commissioner and you're involved every day. Do you feel the law enforcement officers are safer today than they were 3 years ago? Yes or no?
No.
Sheriff?
No, I don't. And in fact, the FBI just reported yesterday that 79,000 law enforcement officers in 2023 were assaulted, and that's a 10-year high. So what that shows is an increase in assaults on law enforcement officers. So to answer your question, whether they're safer, we certainly are better well equipped and can save lives much better than we did in the past, but for sure they're not as safe as they were in the past.
Yeah. And very quickly, because I've got a couple other questions. Mr. Bullock, do you believe officers are safer than they were 3 years ago?
No, sir.
And Chief, do you believe they were safer than they were 3 years ago?
As we see the increase in violence against police officers today, I would have to say no, due to the increases.
Okay, and thank you for your answers. 2 of the things I want to focus on very quickly, and I probably will only have the time to focus on one. First is the open border policies that we see. I know that was referenced particularly in your testimony, Mr. Bullock, about some of the challenges that you're seeing because of that. And though not referenced in other testimony, I believe that we can say that the open border policies has put a strain on law enforcement. But the other thing I want to touch on very briefly is rogue prosecutors. And I know particularly as it relates to you, Mr. Bullock, there's been some allegations in the media, not by you, about the prosecutor there in Austin. But want to read this headline and talk on this very briefly, and this kind of capulates both. This is a CNN article. It says 7 people indicted in connection with assault on NYPD officers outside migrant shelters, officials say. The article, which is dated for the purpose of the record, is February the 8th. The article says 7 people have been indicted in connection with an assault last month on 2 New York police officers near Times Square, and authorities are working to identify 3 others who were involved. The indictments come in a case that has drawn attention in part because of the migrant status of at least some of the defendants, and because 4 of these named in the indictment were released last week without bail. Are rogue prosecutors, do they pose a risk to law enforcement in general? I'll let you answer just yes or no very quickly because I'm over time, and with that, I will yield back.
Yes.
Yes.
The gentleman yields. Oh, wait.
Can I answer the question?
Yeah,
Then I'll yield back?
go ahead, sure.
Yes, sir. If each of you would mind answering the question, then I'll yield back, and I apologize for being over time.
Yep. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir.
Briefly.
Yes, I agree.
Absolutely.
Not just to police, but to the community as a whole, yes.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, the ranking member on our Cybersecurity Subcommittee.
Police Week's always a bittersweet week in Washington, D.C. We remember the fallen, those who have given their lives in the service of their community over the last year, but also it's a time for fellowship and brotherhood and sisterhood of the profession to come together in our nation's capital. And just first want to honor the service of those who we lost last year. I want to thank each of you for your service and wanted to just go through a couple of different incidents that this committee has focused on and this Congress has focused on, and just get your perspective. Do you agree, Mr. Mays, that the officers who defended the Capitol on January 6th are heroes?
Yes, sir, I would agree.
And how about you, Sheriff Chapman?
Anybody that puts their lives on the line to make sure that they're keeping people safe is a hero to me. So I would agree that anybody that was assaulted, certainly by the rioters, were heroes.
And how about you, Mr. Bullock?
I would stand by the same words. Any officer that puts on this uniform lawfully doing their duties is a hero in my book.
And Mr. Bryant?
I am in concurrence that any person that puts on this uniform and honorably serve out their career is a hero, absolutely.
And Mr. Mays, if you assaulted or physically harmed an officer on January 6th, does that make you a criminal?
Anyone that assaulted an officer on January 6th and then is arrested and convicted is a criminal. Yes, sir.
And Mr. Chapman?
An assault on a law enforcement officer is a crime, so yes, that would be a criminal.
Mr. Bullock?
Be the same.
Mr. Bryant?
I'm in agreement that you become a criminal.
And by the way, I support legislation on the Judiciary Committee that would make assaulting or committing a battery against a law enforcement officer a separate class of crimes. And I hope we can
Gentleman
pass
yield
that.
for just a second?
Yeah,
They do that in Tennessee.
good. Yeah, we should do it federally. Thank you, Chairman. One last question as it relates to January 6th. Do you believe that anyone who is convicted of harming an officer on January 6th is a hostage, if they're in prison for that?
No, sir, I do not.
Sheriff?
I don't really understand the question.
I don't either. Do you believe that calling a January 6th convict a hostage is appropriate, that if they're in prison, that they're a hostage?
I would say that anybody that assaulted a law enforcement officer that was charged with it and is going through the legal process is the appropriate action is being taken.
Great. Mr. Bullock?
Regardless of the event, if someone is charged with a crime, follows due process, and is convicted, they are a convicted criminal, not a hostage.
Mr. Bryant?
I do not consider someone who was arrested for assaulting a police officer a hostage.
Great. I also just want to point out, there are some on this committee, not all, certainly not the chairman, who have advocated for defunding the FBI. Do you think we should defund the FBI, Mr. Mays?
No, sir.
Sheriff?
No, sir. I have a son who's an FBI agent, so no. I want to keep him employed.
Mr. Bullock?
No, sir.
And Mr. Bryant?
No, sir.
So I just want to have some real talk with you all and some of my colleagues, because I'm the son of a cop. My brothers are cops. I was a prosecutor. Law enforcement for our family is not a career, it's a way of life. It's about putting the bad guys away and keeping the community safe. And so to me, when I hear some of my colleagues, again, not all of them, but some of them on this committee thump their chest and say that they back the blue, but then they're going to call a January 6th convict a hostage, that's not back in the blue, that's back in the coup. And when some of them say that they back the blue, but the second the blue raids the house of their preferred candidate for president, that's not backing the blue, that's backing a fool. And so I'm all about supporting law enforcement and honoring them during Police Week. but we got to be consistent. Police don't give a rip about politics. They just want to serve the community. They want to be independent and free of politics, and we should back them every time they do their job, expect the highest amount of accountability, but not just expect them to wear red team, blue team when it suits them. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Jimenez, the gentleman from Miami, Florida, for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you very much. And, you know, most of you probably know that I was a firefighter for the city of Miami, but probably most of you don't know that I was a special officer who actually served on the SWAT team of the city of Miami Police Department. So while I rode a red fire truck, I also, every once in a while, especially during certain difficult times, I also rode with the police department. And so I honor the four of you for your service in public safety and in the police department. When I was the mayor of Miami-Dade, I was also the sheriff of Miami-Dade. And one of the things that I did was after the incident in Paris, France, I mandated that all my officers, patrol officers, et cetera, would be equipped with AR-15s and enhanced body armor. Is that something which is normal in the United States? And do you think that we should protect our police officers, more? If we're asking them to take their life and put it at risk, should we, as either community or a country, also give them the protection that they need in order to carry out their tasks? And so I'll ask the four of you, is this something normal or is this something a little bit unusual?
Thank you for the question, sir. Protecting law enforcement officers is essential, and that comes in the form of equipment, including the body armor, the rifles, all the weapons, the radios, less than lethal force methods, everything they need, and it also includes the training. All of it together, they need to be properly equipped.
But is that normal? Is that, are the officers in this country sufficiently protected across the nation, or is it something which is jurisdiction by jurisdiction?
I don't know that I can answer for the entire nation. I could say in the state of Tennessee, it's generally jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It depends on funding.
Fair enough.
I would agree it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and I served in Miami with the Drug Enforcement Administration, so I know how dangerous it was certainly during the cocaine wars down there. I think we do need to be equipped well. We need to be able to defend ourselves against very violent criminals out there, but that does come down to a jurisdictional issue and how those communities feel about how the police, law enforcement officers in those areas should be equipped.
Yeah, and I was on SWAT team during the cocaine wars, so yeah, next.
I would say that's probably not the normal. I'd tell you in Austin, every officer is not equipped with an AR, nor are they all certified to use one per se, as well as us getting enhanced body armor is not standardized, that they'll carry it on them all the time. It'll always be on their person.
Would you want that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Bryant.
Thank you. As a representative of law enforcement, not just nationally but internationally, I can tell you that it goes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There's not an equal level of distribution, nor in equipment or training, and so we have to improve upon that nationally.
All right, my second question is that Director Wray has informed us that because of the openness of the border, that he expects or he has apprehensions about a possible terrorist attack here in the United States. Because frankly, there was about 2 million people. We haven't the faintest idea where they came from, who they are, where they are, or why they're here. Do you all have the same kind of apprehensions in, that Director Wray has?
Yes, sir, I do. Very concerned about people coming across the southern border, and we don't know where they are, and we don't know where they're going.
That absolutely concerns me, yes.
I would also agree we deal with, on a regular basis, interacting with individuals who have no form of identification that we know who they are.
Mr. Bryant?
Yes, we trust the information being provided to us by Director Wray, and so I'm in agreement with it.
Do you feel that the federal government is giving you enough in the terms or in the area of intelligence to be able to protect your jurisdictions to the best of your ability, in light of the fact that Director Wray believes that there is a a grave threat to the homeland from terrorists unknown to us? Go ahead, one at a time.
Yes, sir. We're not getting all the information that would be helpful. The federal government is apparently unable to tell us how many immigrants are coming to Tennessee, where they're going in the state, where they came from. We don't have that information. So if I don't even know how many are coming and where they're from, then how can I begin to understand what kind of threat they pose to my state?
We have a good relationship with the federal counterparts, and the information we get is more kind of personal contact, but I would say that, as always, that communication could be better.
We're probably a little bit more different in that we have issues with our local officials that tend to try to restrict our use of information that is trying to be passed on to us or accessible to us.
Having a strong relationship with our federal partners is essential to what we do. However, we do recognize that there's a level of continuous challenges around intelligence and information.
Thank you again for your service, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Ivey, the gentleman from Maryland, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank you for calling this hearing today. And I appreciate the panel of witnesses as well. Deputy Commissioner Mays, I was especially impressed with your testimony. I thought it was right up the alley of the types of things that we can do here on the committee and things that we should hear about. Your points about the school shootings, I thought was very helpful. And one thing I did have a question about, you mentioned, I think it was 94%, there's an opportunity to preempt some of these shootings because we have information that somebody's planning on doing it. 94% of the time. I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on things that you think we could do, especially here in Congress, to help address that.
Thank you for that question. Those study numbers are compelling, and the INTAC, the National Threat Assessment Center study that I referenced in my written testimony, is not the only one. There are multiple studies, and again, they tell us that most attacks on schools, targeted violence, as it were, there is a pathway to violence, and if we can get involved and get the shooter off that pathway to violence, we have a chance at stopping something from happening. Unfortunately, there's no real shortcut. It's a roll up your sleeves and get out there and talk to the person, an intervention. It's a multidisciplinary team approach. I think certainly the United States Congress could help by more funding for those type of programs. Just last year in Tennessee, the multidisciplinary threat assessment approach in each school prior to last year was it was permissive but not required. A new state law has made that a mandate, and so part of the governor's initiative to put a Homeland Security agent in each of Tennessee's 95 counties is specifically to help coordinate that multidisciplinary approach which is needed. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I might follow up with you afterwards as well. And I did want to, actually I forgot to welcome our new member, Representative Kenney from New York, and I take the chairman's point that we're close to having a quorum for New York delegation meetings here on the committee, but certainly welcome you. I did want to make a point too, with you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues here. I had a chance to go out and visit the Secret Service facility, which is in my district, where they do training. And some of the training they do, and I take the point from some of the testimony today about how important training can be. So I was quite surprised to see that our Secret Service doesn't have a facility for training on protecting the White House. So when they took me out to show me what they do, they took us to an open field, literally, and they said, imagine the tree line at the back is the White House, and the road that we're on would be Pennsylvania Avenue. And then they did the demo, with people coming in and, the dog went out and intercepted them and all of that. But it was like playing pickup football, and, as a kid, the pine tree is the touchdown line. That's what they're doing, actually, to prepare for attacks on the White House. So one of the things I'd like to ask at some point, not today obviously, but I hope that's the kind of thing that we can take a look at and try and figure out ways to help them get some kind of environment where they can do some training. The best they can do right now is Tyler Perry built a mock White House for a movie or something back. So they fly him down there and use this mock White House, which obviously isn't the same thing as the real thing, and certainly wouldn't be the kind of place that you'd want to do training to protect the President of the United States and the family. But that's what they've got right now. So I would love to have a chance for us to take a look at that as a committee and see if there's a way to step up on that front. And then finally, let me end with this. National Police Week. And I thank the chairman again for holding a hearing on the topic. I thank all of you for the service that you provide, the risks that you've taken, the sacrifices that you and your families have made, and for police officers around the country and their families as well. I was a local prosecutor. I first got elected in 2002. Before I took office, 2 police officers were gunned down trying to serve a warrant for a mental health issue. And it was in the guy's parents' house. They didn't know that he had a firearm. So there's a guns issue, there's a mental health issue. I think all those are the kinds of things we need to talk about more as we move through these. But thank you to you and law enforcement officers around the country for the sacrifices you make and the work that you do to protect the country and our communities. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Sounds like a rock drill, doesn't it, Mr. Crane? Yeah. I now recognize Mr. Gonzalez, a gentleman from Texas, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our country, and thank you for the men. Please reshare to the men and women that serve alongside you that this committee is committed to making sure that you have all the tools you need to be successful in keeping Americans safe. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Bullock. Justin Berry is a good friend of mine, an officer there in Austin, and I hear a lot about kind of behind the scenes what's happening. And in many cases, I feel as if you're serving behind enemy lines. And I want to take this opportunity to really tear into the Travis County District Attorney. I think that guy has done a terrible job. I think that individual has made that community unsafe. And those type of situations need to go away. We need to get back to everybody is on the same team, paddling in the same direction for the safety of all citizens, not this ideology or the other. And my question is to you, sir. In recent years, rogue prosecutors have brought radical ideas on how to approach our criminal justice system. We are seeing prosecutors refusing to prosecute offenders and allowing low bond amounts for violent criminals. We've seen criminals posted bond that end up committing more violent crimes, in some cases shooting police officers and endangering the community. This is a dangerous trend and tells communities that there are no real penalties for breaking the law. My question to you, Mr. Bullock, is what are some of the tools that states or Congress might be able to use to reel in some of these criminal-friendly prosecutors?
Well, thank you, sir. It undoubtedly is an issue that we deal with. It's the enforcement aspect is the biggest part, where laws are passed, laws are in place, but yet we have individuals that decide on their own not to enforce those laws. I think that some opportunities are what Congress is already looking at, and in particular when officers are targeted, that becomes a federal crime, because then we tend to have decent working relationships with U.S. attorneys that do prosecute those crimes, along with a lot of the other drug crimes that we have. For example, we just recently in Austin had almost 80 overdoses on fentanyl that resulted in 9 people dying. And then we had, between EMS and APD, I believe it was over 300 doses of Narcan that were administered within a single weekend. Yet we have a prosecutor who drops unilaterally any possession of a controlled substance under a gram, and that can be a lethal dose of fentanyl. So any efforts that would strengthen prosecution, that make sure that crimes are actually enforced and prosecution is followed through, would be extremely beneficial.
Thank you. This is certainly getting a whole lot more attention here on Congress, because I feel as if you are doing your part of the job. You're putting the uniform on, you're going to work, you're once again trying to protect your community. And then when you pass that ball off to the prosecuting standpoint, in some cases, you have people that are throwing the ball the other way, and it's not getting down the field. I recently introduced the COPS Act, and one of the things that I thought was interesting on it, and I'd love to get your take, is the COPS Act includes any attack against a police officer to include explosive materials such as fireworks and other dangerous weapons. We always talk about guns. We always talk about a police officer getting shot in the line of duty. What I'm starting to see is this morph into something else. You know, these criminals, these rioters, they're using fireworks, they're using, bottles of water that have been frozen. So once again, are you seeing an increase in other than kind of firearms, Mr. Bullock, other than firearms, are your officers under attack with these other areas?
Yes, other things that you mentioned, such as fireworks, are being used. High-powered lasers are an issue as well. We've even recently discovered of a dry chemical that can be thrown on officers that burns, and it causes, it can be potentially lethal depending upon how it's treated. And so these are all things that we're having to prepare for now, that it is not just firearms that are a threat to law enforcement.
I see this growing, and we have to get ahead of this. It can't just be firearms when a police officer gets firearm. My last question is for you, Sheriff. I lean on sheriffs heavily. I have nearly half of the overall southern border. And one of the questions I want to ask is a little bit more blocking and tackling is license plate readers. In many cases, what I hear from my sheriffs is license plate readers are a game changer. You're able to find more information and get an aspect of it. So just in general, what is your thoughts on interacting license plates readers and the data along that into your county?
License plate readers are critical information that helps us solve crimes up and down the coast, anywhere in the area, gives us a heads up on anything that might have been like a crime that had already occurred in like a neighborhood where we can go back then and track it. A license plate reader and see who might have been in the neighborhood, and then you can get yourself a suspect and possibly prosecution based on something as simple as that. So they're critical to what we do. We need to have them. We need to have access to that information, and it really does help us quite a bit.
Thank you, Sheriff, and I yield back, Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Garcia for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for your service as well. I was mayor of Long Beach before I got to Congress for the last 8 years, and so I worked with our police department, obviously very closely. I'm really proud of the men and women that serve in Long Beach and police departments across the country. I also want to thank them for working in those 8 years to focus on also issues that I believe made the Long Beach Police Department focus on issues around diversity, around equity, around community policing, and other initiatives that really made, I think, our police department inclusive of the community. Now, we know that law enforcement and keeping people safe shouldn't be a partisan issue. I hope people understand that when we talk about supporting the police, we need to follow through on that support in Congress through real actions, not just partisan messaging bills. And police officers actually need the tools to do their jobs. They need training, they need technology. And of course, we need to make sure that we can hire and recruit talented people into our police departments. That also includes and means federal funding. Now, Mr. Bryant, would it support state and local law enforcement to actually defund federal support programs for community policing?
Absolutely not. Many of our agency work together within a type of ecosystem that we are relying upon one another. And so any defunding of our federal agencies will have a significant impact on our local enforcement agencies as well, as we typically have TFOs on part of those.
Thank you, sir. I'm assuming you're familiar with the COPS federal funding program as well.
That's correct.
Which, as we all know, if you ask any police department across the country, particularly those in urban large cities, they're critical for our police departments. 80% of the majority have signed on to a budget which actually eliminates and reduces funding for our COPS federal program for police departments. I think it's really important that we keep that funding and that we support law enforcement across the country in places like Long Beach and across America. Now, Mr. Bryan, I also wanted to show you this graph because I think it's really important. As mayor, we would track data. This is data that comes from police departments from across the country. As you can see here, there was a surge of homicides by 30% to the highest level of the 90s here in 2020. And overall, we know that violent crime and homicides has been decreasing over the last few decades, even though some like to scare folks and act like somehow we are in this massive crime wave that we've never seen. We know that's just actually not true. But in 2020, when we did see a small increase, who was president in 2020?
In 2020, it was President Trump.
That's right. And so if you look at the graph of the overall crime that was decreasing, and we see the one spike that we had, it was actually during Donald Trump's presidency. And since then, crime is actually beginning to decrease. In fact, we're now reaching again lower levels because President Biden and other presidents and other mayors and other governors have also invested in community policing, in community safety, in park programs, and ensuring that we not just focus on the policing side, but that we're also investing in communities. And so I just want to be very, very clear about where actual homicides in the U.S. have actually gone. They're going down, and in fact, the only real increase we had was when Donald Trump was president, just to know when he talks about what's happening across this country as it relates to crime, he's actually wrong. And so I wanted to make that note. And I wanted to say one final thing. As you probably know, we want to go back to January 6th. We talk about policing and supporting police officers. I think it's very important to support our Capitol Police that were here and protected the Capitol on January the 6th. I toured the DC jail with, in fact, one other member of this committee in the majority. And when we did that, unfortunately, those prisoners, those insurrectionists, were treated like heroes. They were hugged. They were given handshakes by members of the majority, and particularly one member of this committee. Let's remember the facts. 17 of the 20 that were charged at that jail were charged with assaulting police. 6 of them had already pled guilty, yet they are being called, in some cases, heroes. They are being called hostages by folks in the majority. In fact, this right here is a reminder, these circles, of folks that actually are in the DC jail that have been called heroes, that have assaulted police, that have done nothing but essentially commit an insurrection and treason against this country. So when we talk about supporting law enforcement, sir, we talk about ensuring that we support our police officers, it's very important that we support the Capitol Police and not the 20 people that are being held and that are being coddled, supported, and uplifted by some members of the Congress, which I think is shameful, disgusting, and has no place, and quite frankly, hypocritical as well. To conclude, I want to submit this profiles of the January 6 inmates of the DC jail, which is an article that just outlines and lists exactly who these quote-unquote hostages, as called by some in the majority, actually are. Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Ezell, a former sheriff, for 5 minutes of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here this week, especially serving in the House on National Police Week, acknowledging the hard work of local law enforcement and federal partners that we work with. Yesterday, I was proud the House unanimously passed my resolution, which expresses congressional support for local law enforcement and condemns the call to defund the police. This is particularly important, and I believe relates to the conversation today, as the Biden administration refuses to enforce laws at our border that would make law enforcement officer jobs easier. Sheriff Chapman, it's great to see another sheriff in the room today, and glad to see all of you here with us. I know you glad to be here. Your testimony about DHS silence when you were seeking answers about the resettling of 1,000 refugees in your community is disturbing. As a former sheriff, I know how important information sharing is, and I would expect DHS to fully cooperate with local law enforcement. Clearly, that's not happening. I'm sure you brought your concerns regarding intel sharing to DHS, and tell us what the response was.
The first response was, okay, we understand your concerns. We'll get back to you. We'll work this out. About 2 weeks later, still nothing had been done, and it was clear that the only way that we were going to solve this issue with the people coming in and getting the community notified, there was no transparency in this with regards to anything that was occurring with that, would be for us to do it ourselves. So I called a stakeholders meeting myself. I thought I'd have about 12 people that would show up. I ended up having probably close to 70 that showed up. We went around the room, everybody from faith-based leaders to hospital members to fire and rescue to, many three-letter agencies around the Beltway here. And we were able to put together a plan and do it, and then have a subsequent community meeting so that the citizens would know what to expect, what was coming in. So, in other words, everything that was handled that needed to be done was done at the local level with very little assistance until we had that community panel where they all came in, and then were able to, after we had already organized where we needed to go with that community panel, to then relay what was going to happen and how we were going to handle it. Fortunately, because we did that at the local level, we didn't have any issues of concern.
Very good. Has anything improved since you had that community meeting with DHS?
The process went well. We have very little contact with DHS, have a lot of contact with our other federal partners, but we do not have very much contact with members of DHS.
As long as I'm here, I will continue to work with the committee to find ways to instruct DHS to cooperate with local law enforcement officers. We all know the importance of information sharing. You also testified that even though Loudoun County is not a border county, you face many of the same issues as these border counties do. Can you elaborate and tell us how this open border policy is affecting your county, and even if you have some knowledge about some other counties around your area?
I would say the most critical part of that is the fentanyl that's coming in. And I just saw recent stats. I think there was 115 million pills that were seized in 2023. There was up 71 million from the year before. Fentanyl deaths are impacting everybody throughout the country. We've seen, when I testified before a subcommittee a few weeks ago, I talked about the 9 fentanyl overdoses that we had from one particular high school, members of one particular high school in one area, within about a 3-week period. So we are seeing issues of concern, and we're seeing the fentanyl use by younger people. It's really concerning me that it's now going down to the teenage level, where before that we saw it between 25 and 35 years old. Now, then it was 20 to 25, now it's 15 to 20, 25, whatever. And it really does concern me that the age is dropping, and I would say that's the biggest impact that we're seeing from the open border policies and the constant influx of drugs that are permeating throughout the United States.
Can you walk us through some of the challenges that's going on with local law enforcement as a part of this border mess that we have? And has this hurt your department's ability to recruit?
I think we've actually done pretty good recruiting because we answer directly to the citizens that we serve. I think there's a lot of people that like that, being I'm an elected official rather than an appointed official. So we're in a position where we answer directly to them and aren't taking our direction from necessarily people that have other agendas that might want to try to impose that on us as law enforcement leaders. So our ability to recruit's actually gone pretty good. We have about a 6% attrition rate, most of which are retirements. Our recruitment is up. We hired, I think, went through 100 people last year, close to that. So we're doing pretty good in the scope of things in comparison to surrounding areas. So I don't really have any personal complaints, but I do know that that's a problem that's impacting many of our law enforcement agencies in the area.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. And thank you all again for being here today.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez from Illinois, and you're welcome to. Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank you for the reminder. So ordered.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we put in the profiles of the January 6 inmates into the record.
So ordered, and you're welcome to introduce your guest if you'd like.
Thank you, Chairman. My mother, who oftentimes many of you have heard of, was here for about an hour, had to leave, but really grateful that she was here. As you know, she brought me here. She was pregnant when she crossed that border, and her daughter today is a member of Congress. So I wanted to make sure that she was in committee. Chairman, I want to thank you and Ranking Member and the witnesses that are here today for being here. And you know, I heard one of my colleagues say, look, the number one job for our officers is to put the bad people away, right? Not just the bad guys, because guys, girls, it could be anyone, and to protect our communities and make our communities safe. I agree with that. And after I've heard so many of your testimonies, it's clear to me that we all agree that we must strategically invest in community safety. I believe community safety is bigger than policing because it requires long-term preventive solutions with professionals that are trained in multiple disciplines. And that working together, officers and other trained professionals were able to address the root cause of violence. For years now, law enforcement has increasingly become the first responder and primary way that we address systemic problems. For example, increased global instability resulting in unprecedented numbers of refugees needing urgent resettlement support, as Sheriff Chapman mentioned occurred in London County, to unaddressed issues that undermine school safety, as Deputy Commissioner Mays noted, is a priority in Tennessee. We have overburdened our public servants with tasks and crises that they're not equipped to confront, which makes them and our communities, right, less safe. And I believe as we're talking about where we are in this precise moment, I think we can restore balance in public safety ecosystem by investing in initiatives that allow professionals to respond to the crisis that they were trained to confront, not mental health crisis. President Bryant, I appreciate you noting how public health and safety require a comprehensive, non-judgmental, pragmatic, evidence-based approach that includes violence prevention measures. So I wanted to ask you, how would increasing the role of community members, healthcare providers, and other trained professionals in public safety response affect police departments?
Thank you so much. Public safety is the responsibility of all citizens involved. And so when we are, and I agree that police, law enforcement, primarily police, are typically the first responders to almost every given incident, which overburdens the profession. But increasing, allowing the community to play a significant part is very beneficial to what we do. Incorporating other professions in what we do, as stated in the space of mental health, I think will help us tremendously.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. You know, Chicago, I represent, I believe, one of the greatest cities in the world, Chicago, and it's been working to right-size the role of police. It's been redesignating some of the overwhelmingly amount of public health and service work delegated to the police department back to community partners and trained professionals. The Chicago Police Department reported that in 2019, its officers had to respond to over 40,000 calls with a mental health component of some case. And it's generated, obviously, deep frustration among officers who feel that they're required to respond to social and medical problems for which they're not trained, and that mental health systems should be managing those instead. So to address this, Chicago has started a treatment, not trauma pilot that has counselors responding to 911 mental health calls instead of having to call the police. And one organization using this model has reported that they have not needed police presence for over 94% of those calls. That means that those officers that would have had to respond to those calls can actually address the issues of crime, of violence. And because of community intervention programs, my own district has seen a 50% reduction in shootings and homicides. So as I think about that, and I think about our officers, one of the things that I want us to think about is how do we make sure that you have the resources you need, the partners you need to do this work, and that you are able to put the bad guys and the bad women behind bars while focusing on also protecting our communities. That's why, to me, as we talk about Police Week, I want to make sure that we continue to incorporate community policing and partnerships so that we do what we all care about. Reduce crime, and have communities that are safe. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you all for being here today, and I thank the ranking member and the Chairman Green for holding this hearing. President Bullock, I want to start with you about recruitment retention. In your testimony, you discussed how your department is 700 officers short of where staffing should be. One of the reasons you attribute this shortage was the city of Austin's defunding the police department by $150 million. As you mentioned in Austin's case, political posturing has led to the defunding of countless police departments across the United States, which has increased crime and eroded public safety. Austin continues to be one of America's fastest growing cities. As this growth continues, what do you foresee will be some of the impacts of rising crime on economic development and quality of life for city residents in Austin?
Well, I think we're already seeing it, quite honestly. I've had a number of discussions with business owners that are involved in recruiting new businesses to come to Austin, to come to Texas, and Public safety is one of their biggest issues, and people have opted not to come to Austin because of the issues that we have seen, in particular with crime and as it relates to a lot of homeless issues and various other things. But in particular, enforcement and public safety is the number one factor that businesses take into account. And we're now starting to see people choose not to come to Austin because of the environment that's been created.
And these are not just small businesses, these are pretty sizable companies as well, right?
Correct, yeah, they're businesses of all size. They are still like new startups, but also significant companies as well.
What has the impacts of the defunding department had on officer morale and recruitment and retention?
I mean, from the recruiting and retention part, I think it's pretty quantifiable because we have seen every year since this started, in particular back in 2018, we've lost more officers than we've been able to recruit. So it has a very definitive impact on those numbers. As far as morale goes, it takes a very heavy toll on officers to try to maintain the same level of service that our community expects and deserves, while at the same time doing it with ever diminishing resources. So that's a lot for officers to try to carry as they're trying to go out and keep the city safe.
Sure, absolutely. And just to double down on that, I mean, with you saying you're losing officers, but also in your testimony, you talked about how Texas state troopers have been reassigned from Austin to the southern border, which also hurts. What impact has that had on public safety in Austin, the reassignment of the state troopers?
When they were assigned to be in Austin, they had a notable impact, in particular in areas where we had seen increased call volumes. We'd seen increase in 911 calls and criminal activity. So being able to go and suppress that activity by an increased presence of state troopers was very beneficial, in particular as we have dealt with in recent years street takeovers, state troopers being able to assist in curbing that issue. And when they left, we saw spikes. A study was actually done as well as it related specifically to traffic fatalities, where there was a notable increase that as we dealt with a decreased level of patrol activity and traffic enforcement, we saw, I believe it was around a 60% increase in traffic fatalities that occur as a result of the lack of enforcement we're able to do.
Yeah, so you actually just answered my next question. So the reassignment has had a heavy impact on the ability of Austin police to protect the public, because you don't have enough people responding. So the thin ranks really does have a negative impact on what you can do.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you being here. Deputy Commissioner Mays, I want to ask you a question about interagency coordination. Collaboration and sharing information among law enforcement agencies plays a crucial role in mitigating the threats. Since 9/11, there's been a growing trend of agencies working together to promote transparency and exchange of information. In what ways does the Tennessee Office of Homeland Security coordinate with state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies to address security concerns, and how has your experience been working with them?
Thank you for the question. We coordinate several different ways. I would say at the forefront is the Tennessee Fusion Center. One of the other witnesses mentioned there are 80 fusion centers around the nation and in the territories. Tennessee has one fusion center, and we have state, local, federal partners that participate there. We've also embedded Tennessee Office of Homeland Security intelligence analysts in the intelligence units of police departments around the state. We found that that's a good way to be present and to learn. For example, we have someone in the Memphis Real-Time Crime Center that gives us a good idea of what's going on in Memphis better than we can ascertain from sitting in Nashville. And then the other really important thing I would say has to do with just personal relationships and in investing in those relationships before something bad happens. On the Christmas Day bombing in Nashville in 2020, we were opening presents with my kids, and I got a phone call that a bomb went off in downtown Nashville and blew up most of 2nd Avenue. When I responded downtown, everyone was there, all the federal partners, all the local and state law enforcement agencies in the area, and I knew personally the leader of every one of those agencies that we had met before and discussed responses before. The only one I hadn't met was the agent in charge of the ATF, because he had only been on the job 2 weeks, right? So those are the ways we cooperate, and we do it daily.
I appreciate it, Commissioner. I'm out of time. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to begin by thanking our witnesses for being here this morning and for the work you and all of your colleagues do every single day to keep our community safe. And this week, and in this committee, I want to focus on some of the bipartisan things that we've been able to achieve in this Congress, and some of it thanks to our cyber subcommittee led by Chairman Garbarino and Ranking Member Swalwell. Deputy Commissioner Mays, during your testimony, you touched on the importance of collaboration in responding to cyber-related incidents. How does Tennessee Homeland Security support capacity-building efforts to ensure that state and local agencies have the resources and expertise to effectively respond to cyber-related incidents?
Thank you for that question, and it's many people already know we are in a cyber conflict right now with nation-state actors. There are cyber attacks, ransomware attacks every day. We partner with the federal government, CISA. We're very appreciative of the federal cybersecurity grant. Tennessee has set up a state cybersecurity council where we are making decisions. The Office of Homeland Security has a seat at that table where we are making decisions on where to put that money to get the best use. We are partnering with, one of the innovative things we're doing is partnering with our Tennessee colleges of applied technology, like trade schools, so that we can, we sponsor cyber security training. So these students coming up learn about cybersecurity training, they get a chance to work with us and can maybe pursue a career in that. The cyber issue is very complex, and it's going to take a full nationwide effort to every day to be successful there.
Yeah, and I'd love to learn more about that program because we talk a lot about building the pipeline of cybersecurity professionals because we're going to need them at every level of government, so I appreciate the collaboration that you've done there. President Bryant, thank you for your testimony this morning. Given the prevalence of mental health crises and law enforcement interactions, how can agencies better collaborate with mental health professionals and community-based organizations to provide appropriate care and support for individuals in crisis?
Absolutely. I think that what we have to do is really come to the table and have a more in-depth conversation on how we can work more collaboratively together. One of the things, and clearly my colleague can attest to, is that many of our county jails and prisons have now become a subset of a mental hospital. And so we have to address that because that too has an impact on how we are responding to crime throughout our community. And so having the ability to come together and come up with a more in-depth way to respond to the community will be beneficial.
I think it would also be helpful for you as well to continue your primary function by shifting some of those responsibilities away to either community-based organizations or people who are trained professionals in the mental health space. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think in many instances, law enforcement officers are just ill-equipped to address the mental issues that we are encountering on the street. And when it becomes a bad situation, it becomes even worse for the community.
Well, if you see any best practices, please come back to us and let us know so we can work on them at a federal level. I also want to touch on a different issue, but coming back to you, President Bryant, you have a great deal of experience working with DHS to get federal resources for securing major public events like the 2018 College Football Playoff and the 2019 Super Bowl. In fact, you led the command for both events, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about your experience with the 2018 College Football Playoff, which received the second highest Special Event Assessment Rating, or SEER, from DHS. It was a SEER 2 event, as you know. That SEER 2 rating brought some federal interagency support to Atlanta, which helped your law enforcement team ensure the safety of everyone at the championship game, including the president. The DHS SEER program has never been authorized by Congress, but my colleagues, Ms. Titus of Nevada and Mr. Hudson of North Carolina, have a bipartisan bill that would authorize the SEER program, streamline the rating process, and make the program more robust. It is obvious to me that SEER is an important tool to help state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement keep these large public gatherings safe for everyone. In the time that we have remaining, what, in your opinion, can Congress do to support law enforcement in these efforts?
So to improve upon this, I think, again, having the collaboration of all our federal partners, state and local entities coming together to address any large-scale event is very beneficial to the community that we serve. I had the privilege of leading both events and having a strong relationship with our federal partners was very beneficial to ensuring that both events went off very peacefully.
I appreciate that. Thank you all again so much, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. D'Esposito from New York for 5 minutes questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your service to law enforcement and to this country. Mr. Bullock, you mentioned that even though you are not a border city, the impact of the Biden border crisis has been felt in cities and counties throughout the country. And I think that we could agree that we've witnessed every state become a border state, every city a border city. The mayor of the city of New York actually said that the migrant situation would, quote, destroy New York City. So I want to ask you, what impact has the border crisis had specifically on your officers?
So the few specific examples that I have is one we did because of our staffing crisis. We were relying upon state troopers to come in and to help us in order to support our patrol efforts and in order to tamp down violent crime. As a result of what's going on at the border, they were diverted away from helping us in order to go and help secure the southern border. So that took away additional resources that we had as a department to try to help the citizens of Austin. We also deal with it on a fairly regular basis, whether it's as a victim or as a suspect, difficulties in identifying people. We have people who come and all we get handed is a passport card, a matricular card, a voting card that tells us nothing about where they're living currently in the U.S. And so our officers can encounter difficulties in investigations and trying to identify people where they are. And like I said, that could be either as a victim or suspects. We do have people who come here legally that are engaged in both.
Okay, and obviously one of the biggest issues that we as law enforcement have, I think, throughout this country is recruitment and retention. So we clearly understand that the anti-police rhetoric and the inability for many elected officials and government agencies across this country to support law enforcement and give them the resources that they need has created issues. But what specifically have you seen with your officers with regards to the migrant situation and its effect on morale and obviously something important? I know there's legislation on the floor this week regard to mental health, but what have you seen happen to the morale of your men and women with regards to the issues that your department's facing?
I think the number one recruiting asset that we have are the officers that are currently with the department. And when they don't feel valued and when they don't feel like they are appreciated, it's very unlikely they're going to encourage anyone else to undergo the same mental stress. And so that perpetuates the issue of us having difficulty keeping people in the profession as well as recruiting people to come into the law enforcement profession. So I think holistically, that's probably one of the most significant impacts that it has is the increased stress levels and the toll that it takes on officers and their families it dissuades anyone else from coming in. So that makes it very difficult for us to get out of the situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I spent a career in the NYPD, and I think that we're seeing now, that's fire departments, police departments, they're careers that are generational. And when you see individuals whose grandfathers and fathers and great-grandfathers all served in the New York City Police Department, and they're telling their children not to join the ranks, I think that we have a serious issue. Also mentioned in your testimony, you talked about the fact that you don't have a sufficient amount of officers and that your department was previously defunded by $150 million, cut 150 positions, and canceled recruitment classes. Obviously, Austin's not alone in places across New York, luckily not in Nassau and Suffolk County, but there are members of the city council in New York City who would love nothing more than to defund the NYPD. So it really goes back to the question that I really have in the last 45 seconds is, what can we do better as Democrats, as Republicans, as Americans? What can we do to help departments? And I know the answer, but I think that people need to hear it. What can we do to help law enforcement agencies, from the big ones like the NYPD and the LAPD to the small ones in small towns? What can we do to help
make sure that you have not only the resources that you need, but that you have the officers that want to join your ranks?
Well, I mean, the resources is obviously the biggest thing. It's support. It's making sure that officers know that the work they do is valued, that the work that they do has meaning to it, and that another member mentioned it earlier, that officers aren't too interested in politics. We want to go out, we want to do our job, and we want to be able to do that without being used as political pawns in other people's games. And that's what we deal with rogue prosecutors and a variety of other different ways. So the support is the biggest thing, as well as, quite honestly, addressing some of the things. We may not have an issue if funding were taken away, if responsibilities were taken with it. If some of the mental health issues were taken on by other agencies and not given to us, it may not be as big of an issue.
Well, thank you. My time's expired, but I appreciate all of you, and I value you, I appreciate you, and I hope you all stay safe. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Swazi, the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first start by welcoming my colleague, Senator Tim Kennedy, now Congressman Kennedy, to Washington. He's a great public servant. He's done a fantastic job in New York State, and I know he'll do a fantastic job here in the United States Congress, and he's going to make a lot of friends here because of the seriousness with which he takes his job. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to help to educate us. I know you listened to a lot of this stuff back and forth, and you wonder what makes sense, because people are just trying to score political points on both sides of this. And we've got to start working together more to try and solve the problems we face in our country. And we've really got to all support law enforcement. I was the mayor of a small city, my hometown of Glen Cove, and I was the county executive of Nassau County, where I oversaw the 11th largest police force in the United States of America, where we reduced the crime rate to the lowest of any community in the nation, over 500,000 people. And I know what an important job you do. I know the challenges you're facing right now because of all the attacks that have been made on law enforcement over the years. It's not fair, it's not right. There are people trying to do their jobs. One of the dumbest statements that's ever been created anywhere in our country that is misused so often is this defund the police idea. It's an awful, terrible idea. If anything, I think that most people in the United States Congress agree upon is we need to figure out how to get more money to law enforcement. And I think that there are extremists on both sides. Some people that want to defund the police, other people want to defund the FBI, people want to cut the cops program. We need to get more money for law enforcement, and I think most people on both sides of the aisle believe in that. Do we need to fund the police? Yes. Is mental health a problem? Mr. Bryan, I think, was just saying, I've read statistics over the year, 75% of the people in jail have a drug, alcohol, or mental health problem. 75% of the people in jail have a drug, alcohol, or mental health problem. And those are problems we need to address earlier in life before everything blows up into a crisis. We need to go after bad actors. Are there bad actors in the police department? Yeah, there are. But the large, overwhelming majority of law enforcement officials are good people trying to do the right thing to make the world a better place to live in, and our society would not exist without the good work of law enforcement. So in thanking you, I'm thanking everybody you represent in law enforcement. So what can we do at the federal government? One size is not going to fit all. You got these little small communities, you got these big communities, you got border communities, non-border communities. You've got places with heavy drugs where they want to carry, like Mr. Jimenez was saying earlier, AR-15s and body armor, and you've got little small towns as well. One of the great things that happened when I was the mayor of Glen Cove was the COPS program that President Clinton did. They wanted to put 100,000 more cops on the streets, and we could get a grant to bring more cops into our local little police department. It was a fantastic program. I want to know, would you support the idea of funding for grants to hire more officers or buy equipment or do whatever you think is right for your department? Would you like to see the federal government provide more money for law enforcement? I'll just ask you all quickly. Mr. Mays, would you like to see more money from the federal government for law enforcement?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Mr. Chapman?
Of course.
Mr. Bullock?
Absolutely.
Mr. Bryant?
Yes.
We all agree. Everybody agrees. We need more money from the federal government for law enforcement. Now, one of the things, I can't talk about all the things, but one of the things we can do at the federal level, in addition to providing funding, is to try and address laws that would fill holes that exist in some communities. Mr. Mays, I was very interested to listen to you earlier. It sounded like you support red flag laws, the idea of a police officer or a family member or somebody being able to go before a law enforcement official like a judge and say, listen, this person should really not have a gun. We need to take this gun away from that person. Go through due process, go through a procedure, but have professionals testify and take guns away from people that shouldn't really have guns. Do you believe in red flag laws?
I don't use the term red flag laws because it's loaded language that gets people all upset, but extreme risk protection orders,
Yeah.
the ability to take a weapon with due process available.
With due
from
process.
Someone who is mentally ill or unstable or we believe has capability and intent. The governor of Tennessee proposed something like that. It didn't go, but so I would answer yes, but with different words.
Yeah, and the words you use are say it again?
Extreme risk protection orders.
So I know you have extreme risk protection orders type of laws in Virginia already, Mr. Chapman, so I'm not going to ask you, but I want to ask Mr. Bullock. You don't have those in Texas. Do you think we should have that as a nationwide basis?
I believe there's value in providing additional layers of protection. In Texas, one of the situations that was mentioned, if we do place someone on an emergency commitment due to mental health, we have the ability to seize the firearm, but it's temporary. It only lasts for maybe a week, depending upon a variety of different circumstances. But the ability to make sure that individuals we know are at risk don't have access to weapons, I think is valuable.
It'd be great if we had extreme risk protection laws nationwide, I believe. I just wanted to try and get some support from the different witnesses here today. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Higgins, the chairman of the Order Subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our panelists for being here today. I'm honored and humbled to be a brother of the Thin Blue Line. Long ago, as a younger man, I served in the United States Army as a military police officer, and then later in life as a civilian police officer in my home state of Louisiana for many years. I maintain my post-certification through the Louisiana State Attorney General's office. So I'm a cop as I sit in front of you today. This is a week in Washington, D.C., this bizarre realm of Washington, D.C., where there's a great cacophony of support across the political spectrums for law enforcement. That you'll hear political testimony and agenda-driven questions like how to trick panelists into supporting red flag laws, where in a limited time available, you just don't have the time or the venue here to go into it as to why we oppose such things. And the actual existence of, Mr. Swazi has left the room, but in the state of Louisiana, we have the authority, law enforcement takes guns out of houses all the time under protective order, under investigation of an ongoing criminal allegation. And that property receipt is turned over to the spouse or whatever. Sometimes at the request of the spouse, you remove firearms from a residence. These laws and protections already exist. The problem is when you force them from the federal government into the sovereign states and municipalities. This is where you have major issues and infringement of Second Amendment rights. So, moving on, Mr. Bollock, you're from Austin, Texas, correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
And I would like for you to speak, if you don't mind, regarding the impact of the border crisis. You're a couple hundred miles from the border there, and we know, of course, that the invasion at the southern border, the disintegration of our sovereignty at the southern border has affected the entire country. But would you speak to the impact in your community that the border crisis has had in your city, your police department?
It's had an impact not just from a resource aspect of our population continues to grow through a variety of different circumstances, but we've relied upon the state to help us, and the state's resources have had to be diverted to the southern border. We also have issues when it comes to identifying individuals, when it comes to following up, when people report crimes or when people commit crimes.
What about response to complaints, 911 calls, response times?
They continue to go up. We've struggled with that for several years now.
So your citizenry that's accustomed to having access to police assistance for things like domestic disturbances, break-ins, burglaries, et cetera, suspicious people on their property, things of that nature, are they having to wait because your officers and your deputies in your community are doing other stuff?
Either wait or not get a response at all. There are numerous instances where we quit responding.
Unfortunately, this is happening across the country. Sheriff Chapman, would you, in my remaining 30 seconds, sir, would you touch on the impact of the cartel pipelines, human trafficking, and drug trafficking into your community?
I would say that, as I mentioned before, the biggest problem that we've seen there is the fentanyl problem, which is impacting us, starting to impact our community at younger ages, and I think that's the biggest aspect that's represented by the open borders there with an increase in that. So we are starting to see that. I think our crime rate's starting to tick up a little bit, but we're still doing pretty good in our particular area, but it does concern me, the open borders and the impact it's having across the country certainly is more significant, but in our community, we're still doing pretty well.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Kennedy, the gentleman from New York, for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you very much. First of all, Chairman Green and Ranking Member Thompson, thank you for holding this hearing today. Also, I'd like to recognize the service of Congressman Donald Payne Jr., who passed away far too soon just a few weeks ago. Served on this committee so nobly and leaves behind an incredible legacy. For over a decade, he honorably served and fought for his constituents in Newark, New Jersey. Yesterday, May 14th, was the second anniversary of the Tops Supermarket shooting in Buffalo, New York, my hometown. An attack that struck the heart of our city and really of our nation. Racist, white supremacist gunman came to Buffalo, armed with an AR-15 style rifle covered in disgusting racist messages, and attacked citizens that were simply going to the supermarket on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, taking 10 beautiful souls while it was streamed online in over a matter of minutes. One of the victims was Lieutenant Aaron Salter Jr., a retired Buffalo police officer working at Tops as an armed security guard. And when the shooter came in, Lieutenant Salter didn't hesitate and returned fire, hitting his target. But because of the enhanced body armor, the shooter was unharmed and murdered Lieutenant Salter. Lieutenant Aaron Salter Jr.'s courageous actions bought precious seconds for store patrons and employees to escape, saving lives at the expense of his own. And he serves as a true testament to the sacrifices that police officers make for their communities, and we're grateful for his historic actions. I also want to recognize all law enforcement, this being National Police Week. As the grandson of a Buffalo police officer myself, I recognize the sacrifices that families make on a daily basis as their loved ones go off and put themselves in harm's way. I want to talk about enhanced body armor. And I have questions for our panelists, and I thank the panelists for your testimony today and your lifelong commitment to protecting our streets across this country. as I described the situation that played out in Buffalo just over 2 years ago. We know that Lieutenant Aaron Selter Jr. died a hero and embodied everything that police officers across the nation stand for. He used his training to help others. Because of that body armor, he was unable to stop the perpetrator in that moment. I would like to ask each of you in your respective capacities to believe that enhanced body armor should be readily available for citizens who are not law enforcement.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. It's something I haven't considered before. I would suppose there are opinions on both sides. Body armor also provides safety for people who are doing shooting sports. I would hesitate to say people can't have it, but I don't have a clear answer for you on that.
This would be enhanced body armor, level 3 body armor, military style grade.
Again, I don't have an answer for you.
Thank you. Sheriff?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know if I have an answer either, although if somebody's going to purchase that, it would certainly be nice for us to know and have that information available in the event that we have to encounter that person at a later time.
Thank you.
I'm kind of we're all in a similar boat, I'm going to imagine, where it's not a question that's yet been posed. We're here obviously to protect people's rights and their ability to purchase what is legal for them to do so, but obviously it's concerning when it impedes our ability to enforce the law. So I think there's a balance that has to be found in all of that.
I would agree that more conversation would need to be had as it relates to it. It is concerning when people can use that level of equipment in a criminal act.
I yield my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the chairman of the Counterterrorism Subcommittee, Mr. Pfluger, the gentleman from Texas, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as well as the Law Enforcement Subcommittee. And especially in this week, I want to say thank you to all those who serve, Sheriff, and all of you in your respective jobs as part of the law enforcement community. Thank you. I think one of the reasons that we're having this hearing is to express our appreciation, to make sure that even in some communities where law enforcement may not feel as appreciated, and Mr. Bullock, I'll talk to you about that specifically in Austin, Texas, what we want to do today is to say thank you across the nation to our law enforcement personnel, to the families that support them and allow them to put that uniform on every single day to protect and serve. And I know that when I spoke to our sheriff's department and police department, those that are DPS troopers, just on Monday, that's exactly what I told them was thank you for the service that you all do. Mr. Bullock, I'll start with you. We have a tragedy of untold and immeasurable negative aspects that's unfolding at our southern border for the past 3.5 years. And this committee in particular has held multiple hearings on that. What I'd like to ask you is in Austin, Texas, tell us about the impact of transnational criminal organizations, cartel activity, human trafficking, drug trafficking. How has that impacted Austin, Texas?
Well, I think the sheriff mentioned it earlier as well, but the influx of new drugs is a major concern, as well as when you talk about human trafficking and organized crime activity, they're very resource-intensive investigations. And unfortunately, those are resources we lack at the moment, which impedes our ability to fully investigate and leads to a likelihood that we're not going to be able to investigate everything. So my concern overall is that as you deal with more complex crime, as you deal with an influx of individuals who are engaged in criminal activity and very serious when you're talking about trafficking individuals, that we don't have the resources to appropriately interdict and to stop that kind of activity.
And there was a lack of political will as well inside Travis County, specifically inside Austin. Has that been reversed? Do you feel supported by local leaders as far as the prosecution goes of these crimes that you're referencing?
No, we have yet to see that reversed.
That's really unfortunate. A lot of those officers have come to San Angelo and Midland and Odessa, where I live, because they do feel supported there. Sheriff, I noticed in your testimony, you referenced your time as a DEA agent. So I'll ask you the same question. When it comes to fentanyl and other illicit drugs that are coming across the southern border, how has that impacted you, the job that you're in right now, the community that you serve, and then maybe give us an idea of what this looks like over the past couple of years, 20 years in your time in service, and how bad is it right now?
Well, as I mentioned before, I served all over the country, but I served in Miami back in the 1980s, and I thought I'd seen the worst of the drug problem back then as a special agent. It's far worse now because, we had over for the last 3 years now, I believe over 100,000 people that have died from overdoses. So the tragedy associated with it in a different way, it's not organizations competing for product share. It's just people dying because they're being fed this fentanyl. I can tell you that in Loudoun County, we're very proactive. We've had several fentanyl forums. We're out there all the time. We're working with the schools. We're doing everything that we can. And I mentioned earlier that we're seeing a decrease in the ages of people that are using fentanyl or overdoses are starting to go down to the teenage level, which we hadn't seen a couple years ago. Started with heroin, then it's fentanyl, and now it's almost all pure fentanyl now. So it does really concern me here, and then I look at the problem nationally, and I always, when I give my presentations, I say if you were to fill up the Washington Commander Stadium, every single one of those seats probably still wouldn't have the amount of people that died from overdoses last year. So it is critical that we address this issue. We've got to be proactive on it with the education, Narcan, and all these other things that we do that we're very active on, but also to hold these people accountable and stop whatever we can at the border, because that's.
Do you think there's accountability at the border right now?
I think it's a porous border, so no, I don't think we're having the accountability we need down there.
To our other two witnesses, I'm sorry we didn't have time to come to you again. Thank you for being here. And I'll reiterate, thank you to all that serve, all those who serve and their families for sacrificing so much for the safety of our communities. And it is my sincere hope that we will actually get back to accountability. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Mrs. Green, for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank you all for coming to our committee today, and thank you for the job that you do. Today, I'd like to begin by honoring a police officer in my district who died in the line of duty after being exposed to fentanyl during an arrest. Corporal Christopher Jackson Dye spent his life in service to our nation and to the community of Northwest Georgia. He committed 12 years of service to the Army, followed by many years of law enforcement in Walker County. In November 2020, Corporal Dye was conducting an arrest when he was exposed to fentanyl. The arrest tragically resulted in his passing away from a heart attack associated with the fentanyl exposure. This week, we honor him along with many other brave men and women who have died in the line of duty serving our communities. Their commitment to their jobs should always be remembered. Fentanyl is the #1 killer of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. It kills approximately 300 Americans a day, every day. In counties throughout the 14th District from 2019 to 2022, fentanyl deaths increased by over 350%. This is something I know that you gentlemen deal with far too often. According to the Georgia Narcotics Association, approximately 7 out of 10 pills on the street are laced with fentanyl coming across the southern border. I'd like to ask each of you, is this something that you're having to deal with as well?
Thank you. Yes, short answer is yes. The drug problem that you're speaking of is prevalent in Tennessee, along with a human trafficking element that is a part of that also.
Yeah, absolutely. The porous border is basically the cause for all this fentanyl going through the United States.
Austin is something we deal with on a daily basis all throughout the day.
Fentanyl is an issue that law enforcement is dealing with throughout the country.
Yeah, thank you for that. Also, for many years in the past, we used to hear young men and women say that they wanted to be a police officer when they grew up. But unfortunately, we're not hearing that as much anymore. Law enforcement agencies across the country experienced a wave of retirements and departures and are struggling to recruit the next generation of police officers in the years following the BLM and Antifa riots, where we saw police attacked night after night continuously all summer. Over 93 police cars were burned, and over $2 billion in damages were wrought in communities all over America. The rate of retirements in some departments rose 45% with the previous year, according to research on nearly 200 law enforcement agencies. At the same time, hiring slowed by 5%. The wave had come as local lawmakers and federal lawmakers pledged to enact reforms on police, such as ending the policies that give officers immunity for their actions while on duty. Studies show there has been a 44% increase in retirements and an 18% increase in resignations in police departments. In Atlanta, the department has been down 400 to 500 officers over the past 3 years. One officer who left Atlanta said, basically, we're one bullet away from death and one mistake away from indictment. So why roll the dice with my future when I can go do something else? These are the saddest statements that I think we can hear coming from police officers feeling that they're forced into retirement because no one is supporting them on the job. In their exit interviews, many of them cited the defund movement and lack of support from local elected officials as their reason for leaving their departments and leaving law enforcement completely. But now with the Biden administration's open border policies, it's opened our border to tens of millions of people from over 160 countries all over the world and a steady flow of human and drug trafficking. Police in America are now on the front lines facing new and staggering dangers in every community all over America. I'd like to again ask each of you, can you tell us, is it difficult to hire new recruits to be police officers?
I would say, to give you a brief answer, that the difficulties you're describing are similar issues are being faced in Tennessee for law enforcement agencies across the state.
I can't speak for nationally, which I think you have spoken for, which is a problem. Loudoun County, we're actually doing pretty well, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm an elected official of a full-service sheriff's office, and I answer directly to the people. And even though I'm an elected official, I'm not. We run an apolitical shop, and we support the Constitution, and that's what we do. And so I don't have political agendas driving what we do in the law enforcement community. So it actually works out well for our community.
I'm happy to hear that.
In Austin, and I'd say in the major city centers across Texas, yes, we are dealing with those issues. As a matter of fact, we tend to lose officers from our department that will go to a smaller department because it has a more positive environment that they feel supported in, that they want to go there.
I spoke to Chief Shearbaum just recently as it relates to Atlanta Police Department, and they are seeing improvements as it relates to recruitment. Having discussion with other police chiefs throughout the country, what we are seeing is those numbers begin to stabilize and a unique effort to recruit and challenge differently in their spaces of recruitment. So we're all hopeful.
Well, I certainly hope so. I think supporting our police officers is the most important thing that we can do, especially as elected officials. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Luttrell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, as we honor the thin blue line of police officers that serve this great country and trying to figure out the best way to actually say thank you, so the world can understand it. You know, in the military, as Mr. Crane and the chairman forward deployed overseas in the theater of war in the past 20 years when we were fighting in multiple areas. You know, they throw on their body armor, they grab the rifle, they go out the wire, they do the things they do, and they come home, they redeploy back to the United States to take the armor off, they're able to relax. They're able to spend time with their families, they're able to repatriate and cool down. And I think what is lost sometimes is that the men and women that wear the shield wake up every morning, they kiss their loved ones goodbye, and they walk out that front door with their badge and their weapon system, and they deploy out their front door every single day. Now, you hear the statistics in the military of the cognitive and the physical struggles of combat and what that does to the human body. And those are 6 months at a time. And over a period of 10 to 20 years, you do multiple deployments, 5, 6, 10, and then you're expected to come back, and there's a healing process. There's no off-ramp for the law enforcement officers. 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you deploy out your front door every single day to every single conflict in your area. You know the most astonishing thing that most people don't realize either is every single person, 330 million people in the continental United States have your phone number. My 7-year-old son has your phone number. And if something goes wrong, he's going to call you, and you will respond. And I think what has happened is the narrative has changed that in a way that law enforcement has in some way become the bad guys and girls. And it breaks my heart to say that. And I don't believe that, but it's just something that it kind of resonates in the media and the social media and the platforms that you see and the defund the police. And how did this happen? Everybody has a bad actor. Everybody has a bad day. People do stupid things. And do you blame the entire establishment for a bad day at the office? You know, that's you see that debated in this committee here today and in Congress and in your local law enforcement agencies. But I think we need to take a step back in the American public and understand that the thin blue line is something that's very real. It's those men and women that no matter the circumstances, no matter what you see every day, no matter what you hear, no matter what you feel in your heart. You know how amazing it would be if you could take your eyes out of your head and put it in the American public's eyes, in your ears, in your heart, and say, now you see what I see. Now you hear what I hear. Now you feel what I feel. And I'm coming for you to help you regardless. And you may hate me every second of the way, but I'll be there for you. And it's just tragic in a way that law enforcement should be the most revered asset in our nation, because you're there to save our lives. You're there to do the things that most people don't want to do. You go running in that direction. And that's the best way I can say thank you. I hope it resonates with you. I don't have any questions for you. It'll always get worse before it gets better. And the only thing that I ask is you don't leave. You don't walk away from us. As hard as it gets and the funding goes up and down and people do the things that they do, but every time you go home and you see your loved ones and your kids and you say, man, this is the worst day of my entire life, get up the next morning and go, I'm going to do it again. Because if you don't, I don't even know where to go with that. But God bless each and every one of you, and thank you. I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields. This fun transition, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. We want to thank all of you again for being here. Sincere gratitude for what you do, what you believe in, the rule of law, the services that are provided to this country, what you represent. We honor your courage. We honor those who have lost their lives doing what I can't imagine. You know, it's one thing to leave your family for extended periods of time. It's another thing to leave your family knowing when you walk out that door whether or not that day's circumstances would allow you to re-enter that family dynamic. This week, of course, we're recognizing law enforcement and police during Police Week, and we acknowledge these challenges. And our nation is facing a crisis because of a culture of lawlessness that's been advanced because of a belief system that's taken hold. And it's a rebellious type atmosphere that highest leaders of our country are bolstering, because we're not in solidarity standing up for respect of authority, respect of the rule of law. And we see this, with the defund the police movement that's, just wreaking havoc. It's, as I listened this morning, you all talking about your recruitment, lack of ability to encourage for just the loss of morale, knowing that people from the highest positions of authority have your back. Specifically, what I hear in Oklahoma is our flood of drugs that have come into this country with this, heightened because of what's happening at the southern border. In Oklahoma, sadly, we had an initiative petition that, under the guise of recreational marijuana, brought marijuana in Oklahoma. I'm not proud of this stat. I don't think as a majority. You will find there's pride in this of Oklahomans, but we export more marijuana than any other state because of this ballot initiative that came in. And it's the tie then for the cartel seizing upon that and sending drugs into our state. So let me do this. For Sheriff Chapman and President Bullock, how has this problem of drugs flowing in affected you and what you're seeing?
We had to address the community directly with regards to the overdoses that we saw at the school. We had 9 overdoses in a period of about 3 weeks of students that were affiliated or the students at the school, 4 of which happened in the school, 3 of which required Narcan, 2 of which required CPR, so it was quite serious. And what we find is that there's a reluctance to try to get that information out. We did our own press release, and it caused a little bit of a stir, but what that did was it really prompted Governor Youngkin to immediately put an executive order and requiring a 24-hour notification of 2 parents of that school in the event that somebody overdosed. That was then later put forward as legislation, and it didn't really pass the way it should have passed with the 24-hour notification, which was actually taken out, which was the whole purpose of the bill. But it does impact us in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing younger people doing this. We want to protect our children. We want to make sure we got a safe community. And that's my biggest concern is with the fentanyl, the proliferation of it, the availability of it, and the impact that it's having on our youth.
Mr. Bullock, can I transition? And just because I actually have a question, I think that I can help me move the narrative given the limited time. You talked about the morale issue. I think earlier today you talked about since 2018, you've had a loss of more officers than you've had the ability to recruit them. And so, number one, would you speak to how defund the police movement has impacted the morale? And then talk about the dollar loss that you've also seen that's contributed.
Well, I'd say it's all tied together because the defunding movement, as well as the taking away of money from our department overall, means that we have less.
When you say I apologize for interrupting. When you're talking about the loss of funding, specifically, you're addressing your state the state of Texas having to shift resources to secure our southern border, billions of dollars, federal responsibility, and that is having an impact because the state is no longer able to help you financially as they were prior. Let's continue on.
Yeah, it's a correct characterization. But I mean, when you're talking about the defunding movement overall, a lot of it ties into everything else that you're talking about, in that we have people that do not support officers when they are trying to enforce the law. And so the arrests that they make are tossed out by prosecutors, and so people wind up reoffending. There's no accountability for criminal activity, and so there's a perpetuation of crime that's going on that is leading to no type of intervention. And that ties in directly with fentanyl overdoses. It ties in with officers being exposed to deadly substances, and that all has a dramatic effect on how officers feel they're able to do their job, almost to the comment of, well, what's the point?
Well, thank you so very much. You'd think sitting in the chair you could yield yourself more time, but I won't do that to my colleague who's next. And so thank you for answering those questions. With that, I will yield the gentleman from Arizona, Eli Crane, his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. Thank you for your service, and also want to say thank you to the men and women that you're here representing today. I want to take a minute to honor the courage and resilience of my constituent, Sergeant Preston Brogdon. The sergeant, a former Marine veteran and a member of a police force in Yavapai County, was shot in the line of duty a little over 2 years ago. He is a true hero. In the face of danger, Sergeant Brogdon selflessly placed himself in harm's way to protect his community. His unwavering commitment to duty was evident on that fateful day in 2022 when he was shot, narrowly escaping a potentially fatal wound. The following months were filled with surgeries and extensive physical therapy. He inspired many on his road to recovery. But his road has not been easy, and he continues to navigate what comes next for him and his family. He was recently fired by the Yavapai Apache Nation Police Department. Despite facing this adversity, he remains steadfast in his recovery, demonstrating remarkable strength and determination. I bring him up today because I don't want his story to be forgotten. Folks like Preston, who sacrificed for our safety, need to know that we stand with them, especially when things get messy. I'm in awe of Sergeant Brogdon's bravery and resilience, and it should serve as a shining example to us all. His legacy of courage and boldness will forever be remembered with honor and gratitude. We've talked a little bit about this on this panel, gentlemen, about red flag laws and even whether or not the citizens of this country should be allowed to have body armor. So I got a question for you, and I apologize, but do you guys believe that the constitutional rights of Americans should be dismissed when it increases the operational efficiency and safety protections for law enforcement? Mr. Mays, I'm going to start with you.
No, I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, sir. Do you believe that the constitutional rights of Americans should be dismissed when it increases the operational efficiency and safety protections of law enforcement?
No, I'm sworn to uphold the Constitution.
That's right. Mr. Bullock.
I echo the same thing. We take an oath as well to uphold the Constitution.
Mr. Bryant.
I agree. We have a responsibility to the Constitution.
The reason I bring that up is because I constantly hear arguments, usually coming from the other side, and though often I think they're well-intended, it's this constant push-pull that we deal with up here, whether we're talking about firearms, whether we're talking about body armor, which I heard about today, or whether we're talking about FISA and whether or not that whole system should be reformed. And so I want to challenge you, gentlemen, as I thanked you earlier for your service, to make sure that we're not, as subject matter experts and people that are often leaned on for their advice when it comes to protecting American citizens, that we hold that those constitutional rights paramount, even though at times it makes it harder for you to do your job. And I want to yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ranking Member Thompson for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank our witnesses for your expert testimony. I think what you do every day reflects very clearly in what you shared with us. I can say that for the Democrats on this committee, we've never ever voted against law enforcement. The nonprofit program for churches and houses of worship, legislation we promoted. And we started off with just synagogues, but then we made it available to mosques and just other houses of worship in general, because we have a fundamental belief that in America, everyone ought to be safe. And whether I'm a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, in our mind, you should be safe. The other thing is the training that was talked about today is absolutely essential. In addition to being a hunter, I'm a volunteer fireman. I used to show up on scenes in mutual aid, and the equipment that we had didn't match the equipment that the department we were backing up. Sheriff, I know you can appreciate this. We used to have frequencies that certain departments would have that the others didn't have. And so we've come a long way, especially after 9/11. We've said that first responders have to have the ability to communicate. So if it's the police, fire, or whomever, they should be talking to each other. The public expects and assume that that's what's happening anyway. Well, in 20 plus years, we've made that happen because we said to law enforcement, if you want federal monies, you're going to have to solve the interoperability problem. And so that's helped. 9/11, the police in New York had difficulty communicating with the fire department, so we lost a lot of people. We've invested a lot. The COPS program, wonderful program. We've used it in my district, and it continues to work. The fusion centers you talked about, it is clear those fusion centers we created here in Congress and working with state and locals, and now they're an integral part of how we protect and serve the general public. And if you want a real fight, you talk about doing away with them. The last thing, I can't stress training. Training is absolutely essential. We need to share facilities in the training. I encourage you to do that. To Mr. Bryant's comments, we have to do a better job of recruiting everyone into law enforcement. It can't just be a particular group. Law enforcement, they're all protecting Americans and upholding the Constitution. And the Constitution, I've been told, is colorblind. It's the application of the law that creates the problem. And if we do it in that respect, I think we all will be better because of it. So we thank you all for your testimony. My comments about January 6th were twofold. I was in the Capitol on January 6th and could not get out for almost 4 hours because of what was happening. The only way most of us survived was because of the law enforcement presence in the Capitol protecting those of us who were just trying to certify an election. But I also had the responsibility of chairing the January 6th Select Committee. I tried to present a picture of exactly what happened. Didn't take sides, but also in law enforcement, you just the facts. And we tried to present the facts, that's what we did. And ultimately, we presented a report. I take issue that people who break the law, I don't care who they are, they're not hostages, they're crooks, they're felons, and if they're so adjudicated, then they go to jail, plain and simple. So apart from that, again, let me thank the witnesses for your expert presentation, and if we have any questions, we'll submit them for your response. Thank you much.
The gentleman yields. Now for the chairman's closing remarks. Let me just say again, thank you on behalf of the committee for your time, and thank you again for what you represent. I think most of us see, I heard it even recently, in the last few moments, the rule of law, respect for authority. I heard an interesting statistic this last weekend, and I read it actually. American First Policy Institute has a quote, a commentary about the likelihood, and then just falling under the thought pattern of respect of authority. Even on the microcosm of family dynamics, that fatherlessness in homes produces 20 times more likely in incarceration. Somebody's going to do something that would lead to incarceration, some crime. 70% of those that are addicted to drugs come from a fatherless home. And so we have a cultural shift that has to happen in this country from the lowest level of us teaching within our family dynamics about respect of authority, understanding and authority doing what authority should. Number one, to love those people within that family, showing them responsibility, and then in return, the children then respond with the respect of authority. So we've got a cultural dynamic that has to change in America. And I'm convinced of those of us that have the platform, support for law enforcement begins in the family first. I think you all deal with that day after day. And for those who are having to deal with the after effects of a culture that's missing the mark on this, thank you for what you do. Thank you for your brother and sister in arms that that paid the ultimate sacrifice. With that, the members of this committee have some additional questions for the witnesses. We would ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. And without objection, this committee stands adjourned.